The protagonist believed he lacked both strength and talent to improve. He envisioned others surrounded by powerful mana. A man lifted his staff high above his head. Glancing at his own hand, the protagonist saw only emptiness, no strength, no wealth, just simplicity. Observing a gathering of warriors, he admitted he might be even less than an average man. Clutching his fist in frustration, he recalled his teacher's words. Victory doesn't require being stronger than the enemy. A faint smile formed on his face. Connor, after battling many dragons, realized that winning wasn't about overwhelming force. If he couldn't grow stronger, he would simply make his enemies weaker. Luminous streams of energy began to flow around him. The system messages showed debuffs. Mortality weakened enemy defense, and exhaustion drained their health and mana. Connor's aura lingered, swirling around the monsters. A glowing magic circle formed beneath his feet. Spinning around, he spotted a monster mid-attack. The creature slammed its hammer into the ground. The protagonist grabbed his own hammer with one hand. Cracks began to spread across its surface. Connor activated Contempt of the Straw, increasing damage dealt to higher-level foes while reducing damage taken. A thunderous impact echoed through the area. His eyes burned with a vibrant pink glow. He struck the monster with overwhelming force. He sprinted forward at high speed. Connor leapt onto a spear embedded in the creature's chest. Satisfaction lit up the protagonist's expression. Intense energy erupted from Connor's body. He remembered the old man's warning: if you can't overpower them, weaken them. The protagonist landed a clean hit right on the monster's face. The elder had advised him to eliminate enemies with a single blow, no second chances. Suddenly, Connor spun around, preparing a strike. Energy whirled around him as the old man reminded him, always aim to kill on the first hit. Connor now stood face to face with a towering demon. With a confident smile, the protagonist remembered being called a master of debuffs. Standing atop a hill and gazing at a distant castle, Connor reflected on Brave New World, BRW, the largest open-world VR MMORPG ever created. The streets below were filled with people going about their lives. The game world was said to span a massive 30 million kilometers, offering absolute freedom. We were shown various breathtaking locations, told of over 2 billion NPCs, limitless content, fully immersive sensory feedback, and state-of-the-art graphics. Connor gripped his staff tightly. He turned around. The protagonist glanced at the group and reflected that BRW wasn't just a game, it was an entire world. Still, he wasn't drawn to that aspect. For him, the real motivation was money. Staring at a game poster, Connor mused that no one could have imagined earning real money just by playing video games. Enveloped in a glow of blue mana, the protagonist recalled that he'd started playing a year ago, chosen the Elemental's Mage class, and after relentless grinding, including battles like the one against a stone golem, had climbed the ranks to become a guild master of the 200-member Beamer Guild. Standing among his teammates, he smiled confidently. As he opened a chest full of gold, Connor thought it was enough to live comfortably for a while. One guy excitedly asked how much cash he'd make and how he had managed to discover such a valuable dungeon. With a smirk, Connor replied there was a way. He admitted inwardly that he lacked a good education or family support. But gaming was the one thing he was naturally good at, and no one could take that from him. Surrounded by his companions, Connor declared that he would treat them and told them to follow him, satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. With a grin and a wink, the protagonist remarked that only inside this game did he truly feel alive. Connor sprinted through a rain-soaked forest, fleeing from bandits. Turning briefly, he saw his pursuers yelling at him to stop calling them fools. Suddenly, the protagonist vanished from their sight, leaving the bandits confused. The downpour obscured their vision. They swore he was just there a second ago. Hiding behind a nearby tree, Connor overheard the bandits arguing about which way he had gone. They believed it didn't matter. He was cornered and would be caught eventually. With a grim expression, the protagonist thought to himself that these weren't just any enemies, they were from Genesis. Connor envisioned glowing-eyed warriors and acknowledged that Genesis was one of the most powerful and influential guilds in the entire nation. Kneeling before a flickering fire, the protagonist bitterly remembered that these fools were the ones who had destroyed his guild. Looking to the sky, he admitted that although Genesis was a large guild, he hadn't expected the power gap to be so enormous. They hadn't even stood a chance before being wiped out. A system alert reminded him he had been playing for 47 hours straight and warned that such obsession could damage his health and disrupt his real life. Staring at the virtual projections before him, Connor realized he had nowhere left to go. He pictured his actual surroundings: a moldy basement, a crumbling room, and an aging VR capsule. The miserable life that awaited him outside the game. Glancing at his staff, he lamented that he had once gathered 100 million credits and rare items to challenge Genesis, only to lose everything due to betrayal from within. Connor opened his inventory and began sifting through what little remained. Slumped on the ground, he wondered if this was truly the end for him. Biting his lip, he questioned why, despite all his efforts, success continued to elude him. His hand trembled as he asked himself whether all that struggle was just to lose it all in the end. Tears welled in his eyes as he broke down, asking why he kept failing over and over again. Just then, an old man appeared before him and bluntly told him it was because he was weak. Smiling faintly, the old man added that in any world, real or virtual, the law of the jungle rules. The strong will always dominate the weak. Standing before Connor, the old man remarked with pity that he found it pathetic for someone to complain about the world like that. The protagonist turned to leave, saying he wasn't in the mood for jokes. But the old man scolded him for speaking so rudely to his elders. Connor stopped, momentarily stunned by the rebuke. Just then, he spotted a bandit charging at the old man. A thunderous blow echoed through the forest. One of the guys commented that the bandit was an idiot. They were supposed to move together. The bandit retorted that it wasn't his fault he was too slow. Another man, more serious, observed that the fool really hadn't logged out of the game. Standing amid the settling dust, Connor faced the old man. Clutching his hand, the protagonist feared it was all over. He had no weapon left to fight. Rising to his feet, Connor turned to the old man and pleaded with him to flee, warning that the situation was extremely dangerous. The watching bandits chuckled, amused that Connor was genuinely concerned about a mere NPC. Behind them, Simon appeared and commented that Connor had always played the role of the noble hero. He thought being a good guy was something cool to cosplay. Staggered by the betrayal, the protagonist shouted that Simon was a traitor. With a smug look, Simon shrugged and dismissed the accusation, saying he was simply seizing the best opportunity available. Connor, frowning, demanded to know how Simon could betray him like this. He had treated him like family. With a sneer, Simon questioned whether family still meant anything to Connor. If it had, he claimed, Connor wouldn't have defied Genesis or sent their allies to die just to preserve his guild. Stunned, the protagonist cried out that it wasn't true. Simon seized the staff and taunted Connor, asking if he had any idea. Holding the staff confidently, Simon declared that only those who thrive together deserve to be called family. Connor scowled, realizing Simon had been the one who stole his weapon. Simon aimed the staff at him and scoffed that it had been useless in Connor's hands. He would make better use of it. Charging up a magical strike, Simon challenged Connor to witness the weapon's true power. A violent explosion shook the area. One of the nearby guys stared in disbelief, calling Connor insane. They used to eat at the same table. But Simon replied coldly that's exactly why he needed to crush him now, so he'd never rise again. Connor growled that they were all traitorous bastards. Simon froze, clearly rattled by the accusation. The old man stepped in, sternly declaring that no matter how low someone falls, stabbing a benefactor in the back is inexcusable. Lightning surged from the old man's hand as he declared that Simon was human trash, beyond redemption. Connor called out to the old man from behind. Simon, shocked, wondered aloud who this person was and whether he had just blocked his spell. The old man clenched his fist and mocked the attempt, asking if that weak spell was truly what Simon considered an attack. With that, he unleashed a torrent of pure mana toward Simon, offering to demonstrate how real power is wielded. The protagonist shielded his face from the howling winds generated by the blast. The ground in front of them was torn apart by the sheer force of the attack. A glowing rune suddenly appeared on Connor's hand. The old man stood tall within a swirling cloud of dust. His eyes gleamed with an intense, radiant light. A system message revealed his identity. An NPC named Old Man by the Road. Level. Shocked, the protagonist cried out in disbelief. It couldn't be real. Staring at the old man, he asked if he was truly nearing level. With a calm tone, the old man said he had been observing Connor for quite some time. Looking at the wounded Connor, who was coughing blood, the old man remarked that the boy had no talent, no money, and not even a shred of luck. In his mind, he envisioned Connor standing alone on a blood-stained battlefield. The old man admitted that despite everything, he genuinely enjoyed watching Connor fight with such relentless determination. Suddenly, Connor's attention was drawn to a new notification. A quest appeared. He had to bow respectfully before the old man by the road, but it warned that a disrespectful bow would result in a fatal beating. Stunned, Connor thought the quest was simple yet grand in scale. Though he didn't know the outcome, he felt this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, one he couldn't afford to pass up. Lowering his head with sincerity, Connor asked to become the old man's disciple. Streams of radiant energy surrounded him as messages confirmed. He had become a disciple of Jesus and transitioned from elemental mentalist mage to disciple. The old man stepped forward and explained that this meant Connor was now a follower of the Great One. Extending his hand, the old man promised to share the path to invincibility. Still processing it all, Connor repeated the word invincibility in awe. A bead of sweat rolled down his cheek. With resolve, he grasped the teacher's hand. Magical circles formed beneath their feet, and pink energy spiraled around them. Amazed, Connor realized they were being transported. This was teleportation magic. A sudden pink flash burst into view. The scene shifted to the heart of Mount Conlin, where a radiant pink beam pierced the sky. Connor placed his hand on the cool ground. Sitting there, he reflected on how even elite players rarely gained access to teleportation magic. The old man turned and told him to follow. They were heading to a place where his training would begin. Still in disbelief, Connor stood and followed closely behind. They arrived before a tranquil lake. Connor commented on how pure the water was. Vincent, the old man, affirmed this and introduced it as the Lake of Liberation, meant to purify him. Standing beside him, Vincent added that he wouldn't go easy on him. Their training would last 99 days, and the lake would assist in this crash course. Connor saw his reflection ripple across the water's surface. Vincent stepped closer and urged him to take his words literally. A new vessel must be filled with new meaning. With a sudden kick, he sent Connor plunging into the lake, remarking that the vessel was still too filthy. The protagonist fell in, arms flailing. Water splashed around him as he instinctively covered his mouth, certain he was about to drown. Submerged, he questioned whether he could even breathe. A system alert appeared, informing him that the Lake of Liberation was cleansing him. Connor was startled as a system warning appeared, alerting him that excruciating pain was imminent. Without warning, he began to scream in agony. Watching from above, Vincent quipped that judging by the screams, the water therapy was truly invigorating. But for Connor, the pain was very real, even outside the game. It felt as if every cell in his body was ablaze. He wondered if the system was even allowed to simulate such intense suffering. Desperate, he reached toward the logout button with a trembling finger. But at the last moment, he froze. Memories flooded in, himself on his knees fleeing from bandits, shielding his little sister's eyes from horror, climbing stairs with heavy bricks strapped to his back. These visions made the protagonist clench his jaw. Burning with fury, Connor realized he couldn't run anymore. Bubbles surfaced in the lake's water. When the countdown hit 0, he finally broke through the surface. Crawling onto solid ground, he gasped that he had survived. With a victorious grin, he cried out that he'd done it. Suddenly, a blue system screen hovered before him. It announced that the purification process was complete and his character had been reset. Connor stared in disbelief and repeated the message aloud. Trembling, he realized his level was gone. Vincent calmly confirmed the purification had succeeded. Turning back, Connor asked what to do now. His level was back to 0. Vincent tossed him a towel and casually remarked that just an hour ago, Connor had been nothing more than trash. Still stunned, Connor asked if he meant from the moment they met. Vincent nodded, adding that all of his stats, strength, stamina, mana, were imbalanced and flawed. With a slight smile, he questioned how Connor had ever hoped for greatness with such disproportionate attributes. Holding his head in frustration, Connor wondered if his level had reset because he had been leveling up incorrectly all along. Vincent envisioned a human outline and declared that he would break Connor down entirely and rebuild him using only the best parts. He described a stat system where, for example, if others gained 1 point of mana per level, so would Connor. Shocked, Connor asked if that meant others would have 100 mana at level 100. Yet he had already surpassed that at level. Glancing at the cave walls around him, Connor turned back to Vincent. Falling to his knees, he bowed deeply and pledged himself as a disciple. Vincent dryly noted that at this rate, Connor would wear out his kneecaps. Walking away, Vincent warned him not to celebrate too soon. He still had a long road ahead before becoming the best. Calmly, Vincent said that for the next 99 days, Connor would have to repeat the same exercises 100 times over. But Connor shouted that he was ready, determined. He declared that if there was a chance to become stronger, he would never give up. Smiling faintly, Vincent said he hoped Connor's resolve wouldn't waver. Connor watched his teacher walk away. A quest notification appeared. Complete Vincent's trials. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the United States at the Hive Corporation's global headquarters. People stood around a massive blue screen, watching with intense focus. One stunned employee announced that the legendary Epic Code 007 had just been activated. The room was filled with unease. People were visibly shaken by what had just happened. Curious, a few individuals approached a man and asked whom Vincent had chosen as his disciple. The man speculated it must have been someone completely ordinary. Another man joined the conversation, confirming that the chosen one was just a regular player. Quietly observing the commotion, a figure requested the image be enlarged. The story introduces him as Fred, deputy chairman of the Hive Corporation and head of the Hexagon Division. Reviewing the data, Fred remarked that the selected player was indeed an average user from South Korea. With a subtle smile, Fred pronounced Connor's name. Gazing at Connor's face on the screen, Fred mused aloud, curious how long this one would survive. Meanwhile, Connor, facing the game's massive screen, reflected that his entire motivation for coming to Brave New World was to escape reality. Standing before a grand castle, he remembered that longing to run away. Watching the castle engulfed in flames, he realized this world mirrored the pain and hardship of real life. Looking down, Connor thought that at his lowest point, when it felt like life had abandoned him, the truth was simpler. It wasn't the world, it was him. He had always seen himself as a failure. Then, looking up with a stunned expression, he saw Vincent standing before him, reaching out. Connor narrated that from that moment on, with a teacher beside him and a spark of hope in his heart, he threw himself into relentless training to become invincible. Lightning cracked through the sky as Connor swam through stormy waters. Vincent drove numerous needles into his body for training. In another drill, Vincent easily evaded one of Connor's attacks. The protagonist scaled sheer cliffs as part of his grueling regimen. A fierce snowstorm howled through the mountains. Connor noted that 3 whole months had passed in this relentless cycle. One evening, Vincent lifted a glass to his lips and drank. Laughing, he remarked that he never imagined a day would come when his student would serve him a drink. Sitting across the table from Connor, Vincent announced that tomorrow would mark the 99th and final day of training. He asked if Connor had started to feel nostalgic for Mount Conlin. Holding a shot glass, Connor bluntly replied that he would never miss a place where he nearly died from overtraining. Vincent smirked and pointed out that it had only been 3 months, and he even gave him a day off. Connor recalled that even on that so-called day off, he had worked hard at a construction site in real life to pay off his mounting debt. Light flickered from the windows as Connor asked quietly whether Vincent had ever felt the same way. The question caught Vincent off guard. Setting his glass down, he admitted that yes, in his pursuit of power, he had gone through similar hardships. But he insisted he had never been as pathetic. Connor scowled and muttered that it was something he simply couldn't escape. Vincent leaned forward and shared a memory. 5 centuries ago, 8 of the continent's mightiest individuals dominated the world. A mental image of the 8 formidable figures appeared in his mind. The wind stirred violently around Vincent, as he confessed he had once been the weakest among them. Blood dripping from his knuckles, he revealed that he'd been consumed by the desire to defeat them all. But they had always been far too powerful. Surrounded by a soft glow of pink energy, Vincent explained that he had retreated to Mount Conlin, where he trained ceaselessly and gained immense strength. Yet, even after all of that, he still couldn't overcome the other 7. With a serious look, the protagonist asked if those people were truly that powerful. Vincent shook his head and clarified. They weren't unbeatable. They had simply died of old age during the 500 years he spent isolated on the mountain. Connor, baffled, repeated the question in disbelief. Vincent stepped outside and gazed silently at the horizon. Placing a hand inside his robe, he admitted that all the enlightenment he had gained from centuries of cultivation had ultimately lost its meaning. He tossed a book onto the table and asked Connor if he truly understood what the word invincible meant. Holding the book, Connor guessed it meant someone who was unmatched in sheer power. Walking closer, Vincent corrected him. It wasn't about being the strongest. An invincible person was someone who never lost, regardless of how much power their opponent wielded. Connor asked if victory didn't still rely on superior strength. Vincent, looking directly at him, explained that true victory didn't depend on brute force. It was enough to weaken your enemies instead. Turning away, Vincent shared that this realization was the core of his enlightenment. He reflected that even the life of a master must have both a beginning and an end. At that moment, pink mana began swirling around Connor's body. A system notification confirmed he had completed his training and successfully evolved. His class had changed from student to master. Looking at his hand, Connor questioned what death of the master meant, then noticed that his username had been changed to Jack. Staring at the projection, he asked aloud about the nickname. With a pleased expression, Vincent stated that as the only disciple of the Great One, Connor needed a name worthy of his new identity. Stunned, Connor thought to himself that in DNA, usernames weren't supposed to change. Yet the system clearly rewrote the rules as it saw fit. Clenching his fist, he felt completely renewed. With this new strength, he believed he could even take down Genesis. Vincent pointed at him and said that, as his disciple, Connor now had a mission to fulfill. With a serious tone, Vincent declared that the 7 warriors he once spoke of surely had descendants by now. A quest notification appeared. Defeat the heirs of the 8 former rulers of the continent. A list of their names appeared before Connor. Crossing his arms, Connor shouted with conviction that no matter who these opponents were, he would defeat them all and prove that his training was not in vain. Snapping his fingers, Vincent, still stern, acknowledged Connor's determination and announced that his training was complete. Once again, pink mana enveloped Connor as Vincent proclaimed that it was time for him to rise and become great. With a smile, the protagonist acknowledged his departure. A bright pink beam shot upward from the rooftop of the house. Glancing at his glass, Vincent quietly mused that he had hoped they'd share one last drink. The scene shifts westward to the kingdom of Burma, bathed in golden sunlight as it illuminates a majestic castle. Walking through a forest, the protagonist muttered that the system had teleported him quite far away. Standing before a fallen tree, he decided this situation might actually work in his favor. At level 1, he didn't want to run into anyone from Genesis just yet. Sitting on a log, Connor thought it was best to level up at his own pace. At least until he reached level. He began analyzing his new class information, equipment, and the unique set of abilities he had as a debuff master. Covering his mouth in realization, Connor muttered that a powerful strike wasn't just brute force. It combined technique with the effects of mortality and exhaustion, his primary debuffs. He began to review the skill description. Mortality created a circular field centered on the caster, weakening enemy armor and diminishing the effectiveness of their defensive abilities. The area of effect expanded with each level of the skill. Then he read about exhaustion, another field centered on himself that drained enemies' health and mana. Its fixed damage scaled with the caster's mana pool, bypassing both defense and anti-magic resistance. Staring at the system projection, Connor was shocked. Rising from the log, he asked in disbelief, "Not even anti-magic could block this? And its fixed damage based on mana?" Burning with anticipation, he couldn't wait to try it out. Suddenly, a squeaky voice shrieked from nearby. A hamster clung to the bars of its cage, crying out that it didn't want to die. Connor turned around and saw a massive tiger charging toward him. In an instant, the tiger clamped its jaws around the hamster's cage. A hidden quest appeared: rescue the Great Spirit and defeat the mutated tiger. Eyes wide, Connor blurted out, "Wait, the Great Spirit is the hamster?" Inspecting the tiger, he learned it was a level 25 mutated beast, transformed by an unknown energy. He realized such a high-level enemy had no business being in a starting zone. Spotting a stick at his feet, he snatched it up, recalling his teacher's lesson. No matter how powerful an opponent may be, the key is to weaken them. With that, a pink aura burst around him, expanding into a debuff field that engulfed both him and the tiger. The tiger hesitated, visibly affected by the foreign mana swirling around them. Connor took the opportunity and struck the beast across the face. A confident grin spread across his lips. The tiger, now enraged, extended its claws and roared with primal fury. Connor narrowly dodged its counterattack. Stepping to the side, he launched another strike at the beast. The tiger lunged forward in retaliation. Connor ducked just in time to avoid its massive claws. Inside the cage, the hamster watched the chaotic fight in disbelief. It was stunned that a mere level 1 human had dared to engage a level 25 mutant, and was holding his own. Terrified, the hamster shouted encouragement, begging Connor to win and save him. With a grim look, Connor realized that even after 10 solid hits, the tiger still had half its health bar left. The tiger's eyes glowed fiercely, radiating red energy. Looking down at the stick in his hands, Connor grimaced. His stamina and mana were nearly gone, and the makeshift weapon was about to splinter. Gripping the stick with both hands, he knew If he didn't finish the fight with the next hit, he wouldn't survive. A deep blue aura began to surge around him. A system message appeared. Powerful Strike. A skill that delivers a crushing blow to the enemy. The tiger and Connor locked eyes, both ready for the final clash. With explosive force, the protagonist leaped into the air. The tiger lunged toward him mid-air. With a calm, focused expression, Connor dodged the strike. He raised his stick and pointed it directly at the beast's face. A thunderous impact rang out. The tiger's fangs shattered from the force of the blow. Multiple level-up notifications filled the screen. Glancing at a tear on his sleeve, Connor muttered that he had jumped all the way to level. He wasn't sure if constantly risking his life was worth it. Staring at the beast's lifeless body, he acknowledged that he had just defeated an opponent he never could before, and that was what it meant to be a Deathmaster. An annoyed squeal broke the moment. The hamster, still trapped, shouted at him to stop daydreaming and get him out of the cage. Once freed, the hamster gratefully exclaimed that he was still alive and owed Connor a thanks. Stretching out a paw with a smug grin, the hamster said he wanted to express his gratitude by accompanying Connor. He figured Connor might be lonely on his journey, and besides, he was being generous. Connor began to walk away and casually replied that he'd be fine on his own. The hamster clung to his leg, crying out that he'd lost all his memories, and with them, his powers. Frowning, Connor remarked bluntly that he wasn't looking to take care of pets. Just then, a message popped up. Hidden quest complete. Reward. A contract with the Great Spirit of the Forest. Reading the notification, Connor recalled hearing that great spirits had power rivaling even the Spirit Kings. Standing still, he thought that while the hamster was useless now, he'd likely become formidable once his strength returned. The hamster, still hugging his leg, sobbed dramatically. Connor sighed and offered to make a contract, grumbling that although the rodent had a sharp tongue, he was kind of cute. The hamster lit up with excitement and asked if Connor meant it. A glowing golden chain appeared, linking Connor's wrist to the small creature. A system message confirmed. Contract formed with the Great Spirit of the Forest. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, Connor noted that if the spirit's level was tied to his own, then by growing stronger, so would the spirit. Standing upright, the hamster said it was time for a proper introduction now that they were bonded. With a proud puff of his chest, the hamster announced his full name, Cactus Hydro Levy. Connor immediately objected. It was far too long. A prompt appeared, asking him to assign a nickname to his contracted spirit. With a satisfied smirk, Connor decided, "I'll call you Coma from now on." The hamster froze in disbelief. Crossing his tiny arms, Coma pouted in protest. As they walked through the forest, Connor teased him about the name, suggesting he make his face look more ordinary. Coma whined, questioning how someone could name a mighty spirit something so ridiculous. Grinning, Connor replied that it sounded cute. Coma shrieked that it was completely unworthy of his grand status, but Connor reminded him that names couldn't be changed anymore. He then asked why the so-called Great Spirit had ended up locked in a cage. Coma's expression turned solemn. Closing his eyes, he confessed he didn't know. With a puzzled look, he explained that he simply woke up one day and found himself already imprisoned, with no memory of how or why. Coma tugged on his own cheek as Connor noted that something odd had definitely happened to him. In response, Coma began yelling that this was exactly why Connor had to help him recover his memories. Connor halted and calmly told him not to rush things. Gazing at a nearby settlement, Connor remarked that for now, their top priority should be getting stronger. Sunlight bathed the structure ahead. A man with arms crossed welcomed Connor. The story introduced him as Jorge, a member of the local mercenary guild. Smiling, Connor said he was there to obtain a mercenary license, thinking it would help him level up more efficiently. Jorge pointed a finger and explained that no matter how exceptional someone might be, they still had to meet the minimum criteria to qualify. Surprised, Jorge recalled a time when even rabbits in Burma's territory mutated, becoming dangerous. Connor placed a large claw on the table and asked if that would be enough. Staring at it, Jorge identified it as a mutated tiger's claw. A system message confirmed that such claws, due to their strength and durability, were useful for crafting low-grade weapons. With a satisfied expression, Connor asked if that wasn't more convincing proof of his capability than killing rabbits or squirrels. Jorge admitted he had a point, but was skeptical that Connor had taken down the tiger alone. Still smiling, Jorge insisted it just didn't seem possible. The confused Connor pressed the issue. Reaching into his coat, Jorge replied that he had enough evidence to go on and would issue the license. Connor couldn't believe he had actually succeeded. Jorge produced a token, explaining that it served as the official mercenary guild license. Facing him, Jorge asked if Connor would stay to hear a bit more. With a concerned tone, he shared that lately, there had been a surge in mutant creatures. Gesturing toward a group of villagers, Jorge mentioned that a nearby ranch had recently been attacked, leaving the locals terrified. Seeing their expressions, Connor asked if this meant that monsters had been appearing more frequently near the village. Jorge confirmed it, adding that the mutated tiger Connor had defeated had shown up there multiple times. Jorge began listing the threats, noting that the tiger wasn't the only menace. Mutated wolves had also started to appear, and even a once docile bull had become a dangerous monster, all of them tormenting the villagers. Connor seriously remarked that he had wondered why this location was considered level 20, and now the reason was clear. Jorge, clearly distraught, pleaded for help. A system notification appeared. New quest: defend the Kingdom of Burma. The objective was to support them until the crisis was over. Looking at the quest details, Connor hesitated, saying his current level might be too low for this. But Jorge insisted that despite his reservations, Connor was the only one who had managed to defeat the tiger solo. Scanning the area, Jorge added that because their village was so remote, reinforcements wouldn't arrive for at least a week. Reviewing the quest again, Connor admitted he usually avoided these types of missions, but this one looked like a great opportunity for leveling up. Rubbing his forehead, he muttered that he understood the situation. Then with a smile, Connor agreed. He would help them. The scene then transitions to the Kingdom of Schreier, near Burma. Inside a castle, bodies lay scattered across the blood-stained floor. A wounded man lay sprawled on the ground, begging for mercy. Suddenly, an axe swung through the air before him. His head was severed cleanly. The executioner muttered that he warned him not to look up. People were foolish, but there was no point in stressing over it. A wicked grin twisted the monster's face. With fiery eyes, he observed that their kind would soon be ruled by someone vastly superior. Meanwhile, someone politely thanked the visitors for stopping by and wished them well. Toma, munching on something, joked that the man looked like a pitiful tramp before, and now just a regular tramp. The protagonist quipped back that he was being cheeky again. Koma leapt onto his shoulder, and the young man commented that he couldn't roam around in rags forever. The thought crossed his mind. This weapon might finally be enough. Holding the weapon tightly, the hamster noted that their shopping was done and now it was time to eat. Shocked, the protagonist asked what he meant. He had just bought him a bunch of magic stones, and he devoured them all already? Koma snapped back, frustrated, that such low-grade stones didn't even begin to satisfy him. Connor groaned, reminding him how much those had cost. The hamster glared at him in fury. A group of men approached. One asked if he was the one who killed the mutated tiger. Another extended his hand, introduced himself as Oscar, and said he'd be Connor's comrade on the next mission. He also introduced Greg, then paused, realizing something felt off. Connor suddenly remembered. These must be the mercenaries George mentioned earlier. They exchanged handshakes and Connor introduced himself in return. The man confirmed they were counting on him. The leader? Connor repeated, surprised. Oscar explained that the strongest usually leads, and none of them had ever defeated the mutated tiger. Connor realized they expected him to do most of the work but agreed anyway. Greg acknowledged that their squad was now formed and asked what their next move would be. Connor said George requested they protect the king from wolves and a bull. He added they'd begin with the Booker Ranch since it was in the worst condition. They arrived at the Burman Kingdom. Booker Ranch. Oscar, alarmed, shouted at Greg to take action. Greg obeyed and drove his weapon forcefully into the wolf. Sitting down and panting, the protagonist groaned about how tough the fight had been. Greg suddenly noticed something strange approaching. Oscar asked in confusion, what was it? A massive, mutated level 25 bull, twisted by some unknown energy, charged straight at them. The hero launched into attack, yelling for everyone to run. Moments later, he spun around, his weapon glowing in hand as he prepared to unleash a devastating blow. He stepped in front of the charging bull. With a swift motion, he slashed through the air. The bull was hurled far back by the impact, as notifications popped up indicating he'd reached level 20. Connor sighed. There were too many witnesses. He couldn't risk using his demonic skill. It would be better to hunt alone. Ron called out to Connor, asking if he was all right. Connor turned back and confirmed he was fine, just like the others. and added that he saw the bull fleeing toward the area where the townspeople were. Oscar, bruised but standing, said that being a tank helped him endure it. Greg had no life-threatening injuries but would need time to recover. That concluded their immediate report. Oscar then remarked with admiration that Connor had defeated the mutated bull on his own, which confirmed the rumors about the tiger incident. Connor modestly replied that he had just gotten lucky. Suddenly, a voice with glowing red eyes commanded them to retreat. The wolves turned sharply in response. Retreating and falling behind the warriors, the monsters all fled in the same direction. The protagonist noted that since the threat was gone, this counted as a successful mission. However, he found it suspicious. All the mutants ran into the forest at the same moment, almost as if obeying an unseen command. Staring into the tree line, he said aloud that it might really be the case. A system prompt appeared, labeling the new mission as an investigative quest. They had to uncover the cause behind the forest animal mutations. Progress, 0%. Reward, 200 gold. No warnings issued. The hero turned to leave, thinking this wasn't just a routine monster cleanup. Something deeper was unfolding. Connor suggested they head back first, though he wanted to keep track of the mutants. Oscar asked if he could manage alone. Smiling, Connor assured him he'd be fine. After all, he was the only one unscathed. Koma chimed in, promising to assist. Oscar nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Ron found Koma kind of adorable. One of the men touched the ground, thinking to himself that this teamwork felt natural now. But he also noted that beyond the forest lay the kingdom of Schreier. The protagonist examined the tracks and wondered if the monsters were planning an attack on that realm. Just then, someone called out to him. Connor answered that he was just trying to figure out where things were headed, and admitted it was getting interesting. Koma told him to look ahead. They turned their eyes toward a castle. The hero recognized it. It was Schreier's royal stronghold. A voice commented that the place seemed abandoned. Suddenly, the castle doors creaked open. Connor's eyes widened in disbelief. From the gates emerged a tiger with a strange monster riding on its back. More creatures followed behind. Nate grinned and explained. It was a legendary goblin, seen once every century. A Goblin Lord, boss class, lightning and fire element user, capable of controlling monster minds. The protagonist was stunned. A Goblin Lord with mind control? That meant he was behind the mutated beasts. Chroma asked if he now understood, and what the plan was. The guy said they needed to retreat immediately. A situation like this was too much to handle alone. The sun set, painting the sky with vivid colors. Back at the Berman Kingdom barracks, someone asked the newcomer to introduce himself. The man gave his name, Chuck, Commander-in-Chief of the Berman Kingdom's forces. Connor shook his hand and said it was a pleasure. Chuck responded that he'd heard plenty about him. George spoke very highly. He added that he was glad to finally have a proper conversation. But then, Chuck, sensing the urgency of the matter, suggested they skip formalities and get straight to the core issue. Placing his hand on the map, he noted that based on what had been described, it seemed the kingdom of Schreier had already fallen, taken over by the goblins suspected of triggering the mutations. Connor confirmed it, stating confidently that the Goblin Lord had used his mind control ability on animals to conquer Schreier. He added that the goblin's next target appeared to be Berman. One man commented grimly that if what Connor said was true, then Berman was doomed. They stood no chance against such a foe. Connor suggested that there might still be time to evacuate the villagers to safety. Chuck silently considered the proposal. Oscar raised a valid concern, apologizing before asking why they had only just learned about Schreier's fall, despite being neighboring kingdoms. Chuck explained with a scowl that relations with Schreier had been poor. And worse yet, they had no established means of communication. The protagonist reasoned that Schreier had likely been too occupied fighting off monsters to send any warnings or updates. He added that the Goblin Lord's strategy was probably to isolate Berman completely before striking. Meanwhile, the goblins smirked with malicious intent. Chuck clenched his fists, struggling to accept that their 300-year-old kingdom could fall to a single goblin. Slamming his palm on the table, he voiced his distress. How could he possibly report this to the king? Connor responded calmly, insisting that there was always some way forward. Chuck, frustrated, asked what kind of solution he was referring to. Connor admitted he wasn't entirely certain, but if given time, they might stand a chance. Chuck asked what he meant by time. Connor replied, it was time for him to grow stronger. Then a voice explained that the plan was straightforward. The strategy would involve archers inflicting damage from afar on the mutants, then luring them into a designated ambush zone. The warriors sprinted away from the monsters, leading them right into the trap. The young man said he would be waiting at the ambush point. Connor declared that he would annihilate them once they entered the trap. He went on to say that once he reached level 30, he'd join the final battle against the Goblin Lord. Chuck reflected on this, noting that because of the Transcendence rune, outsiders like Connor could level up far faster than locals. Still, Chuck warned that the Goblin Lord was level 50, and even if Connor reached 30, the power gap would be enormous. Connor agreed. It wouldn't be easy, but he reminded them that he had already taken down the mutated tiger, which was over 20 levels stronger than him. So he believed defeating the goblin was not impossible. And even if he failed, Connor said, it would at least buy precious time for reinforcements to arrive. Chuck closed his eyes, acknowledging the weight of leadership. Connor addressed him formally as Commander-in-Chief. Chuck let out a slow breath. Then he spoke. Very well. He would put his trust in Connor. A system alert appeared. Crush the Goblin Lord. Quest type. Normal. Objective. Defeat the Goblin Lord. Nate. Progress. 0%. Reward. Unknown. No listed warnings. Toma called over the shop owner, saying he was curious about something. Connor apologized, admitting he didn't have any money left for food. Coma, the hamster, snapped. What did food have to do with anything? Connor, puzzled, asked what he really wanted to talk about. Coma looked at him suspiciously and pointed out that during Connor's conversation with the bald man, he had clearly hidden something. Connor was surprised. How did he notice that? Coma proudly reminded him that he was still a great spirit. He could pick up on such details easily and shouldn't be underestimated. Connor admitted that after reaching level 30, a new skill had unlocked. A message had appeared describing the ability, a powerful strike that scorns the strong and manipulates speed. Connor believed this skill would give him an edge against Nate, although victory was far from guaranteed. The hamster asked why he was hiding such a powerful ability. Connor said he simply didn't want to reveal it yet. He added that with other players around, word would spread fast if they found out what he was capable of. Toma chimed in, saying people loved creating their own troubles. Connor replied that living like that was still better than letting life constantly knock you down. Just then, Ron turned away and Oscar approached, saying he had finished speaking with the Commander-in-Chief. Connor nodded and admitted he wasn't sure what to do next, and felt like he might be acting a bit overconfident. Oscar reassured him, expressing gratitude for his willingness to take on the mission. Oscar stretched and mentioned they planned to get some rest before the mission, asking if Connor would be logging off as well. Connor confirmed. They were going to launch the operation against the Goblin Lord in 2 hours, so rest was a good idea. The other player agreed and said they'd see each other later. Coma asked if the owner was logging off too. Connor replied he'd be back shortly and told him not to get into trouble. Coma cheered, calling his owner generous and thanking him. Then, confused, he pointed out that Connor had just said he didn't have money. With a sly grin, Connor admitted he'd lied and tapped a button. A game message appeared. Brave New World. End in progress. Connor took off his glasses. Sitting in his room, he sighed and muttered how exhausted he was. He got up, saying he should grab something else to eat. Then he dropped onto the bed, deciding that even with limited time, some sleep would help. He thought back. So much had happened. His guild had collapsed and he'd been forced to flee. Memories surged through his mind. He recalled meeting a mentor, gaining a hidden class, the Master. And now, here he was, fighting monsters to defend an entire kingdom. What had started as a job for money had become something more. He genuinely enjoyed playing now. With a small smile, he asked himself if maybe he was finally starting to love it. A voice inside him answered. He couldn't wait to dive back in. He wanted to get stronger and enjoy the thrill of unrestricted play. He sprang from bed saying he couldn't resist. He had time to level up before the quest began. Just then, someone greeted him, asking for Mr. Connor. He turned around surprised. He asked who was there and saw a few men standing before him. One of them stepped forward and confirmed they were looking for Mr. Connor. They'd come to install the capsule. The hero looked at the delivery men in confusion, asking again about the capsule. They must be mistaken, as he hadn't ordered anything. Several boxes stood before him. One of the men confirmed the address and name, Connor. Connor replied Yes, that was him, but repeated firmly that he hadn't placed any order. The delivery man handed him a document explaining that their job was just to deliver and install the capsule. He was instructed to hand this over. The letter read, Epic Code 00 Selenium. Congratulations. It dawned on Connor. They were referring to his hidden class. He remembered hearing that hidden classes offered significant perks. This capsule must have come from the central office of DAM. One of the men hesitated, then simply said, Gentlemen, with a friendly smile, Connor said they probably needed a break after all the hard work and offered to treat them to any drink they wanted. They replied they'd gladly take coffee. Meanwhile, a man nearby stood around the corner speaking on the phone. He reported to his boss that they had arrived at Connor's place and were beginning the installation. The voice on the other end praised the progress. Manager Louis. Louis asked curiously if the man knew why the chairman had gifted such a capsule to Connor. Did they know each other? The worker replied that he had no clue. He speculated. Maybe Connor shared the same hidden class as the chairman, and they saw each other as comrades. He had seen this exact capsule model featured in an ad starring a famous guildmaster. Nicole, the woman in the ad, pressed a button with the VR capsule logo glowing. Org capsule. A capsule far beyond the reach of most ordinary players. And now, one of those elite capsules was sitting in Connor's own home. Connor ran around it in disbelief, shouting that they'd actually gifted him this beast of a machine. It was insane. So this was what came with a hidden class. Putting on his glasses, he grinned with excitement. There was no time to waste. He'd catch up on sleep in the game world. He couldn't wait to test the capsule. As he lay inside, sensations rushed over him. This felt completely different from his old capsule. So comfortable, he could barely tell he was inside one at all. Everything looked unbelievably real. Then a strong heat, and the smell of burning reached his senses. Confused, he muttered, Was that really smoke? Before him, an entire village was engulfed in flames. A group of wolves attacked a warrior trying to defend it. Goblins ruthlessly drove weapons through innocent villagers. Connor stood frozen, staring in disbelief. What was happening here? A voice cried out desperately. To save the Great Spirit. A wolf gave chase to the tiny hamster, prompting Connor to ask in alarm. Was that Coma? Coma was shrieking that he couldn't run any farther and that the noble spirit's life would end here. The hero rushed forward and struck the attacking beast. The wolf's furious eyes widened in shock. Toma let out a heavy sigh of relief, then shouted at his owner, who now stood with one boot firmly planted on the subdued creature. Connor asked if Coma was hurt, but the hamster lunged at him furious, calling him an idiot. Why had he shown up so late? He was sure he was going to die. Connor picked him up by the scruff and told him to calm down and explain what had happened. But Coma just asked, how could he not see it for himself? The hamster began explaining that right after everyone logged out, the Goblin Lord and his mutant army launched a surprise attack on the kingdom. They were completely unprepared for it. Connor realized with frustration that the goblin had waited until the players disconnected before making his move. But then something struck him. Weren't there supposed to be other players online? Coma shouted that no, Connor was the only one left, which was why everything had descended into chaos. Connor grinned. That meant he didn't have to worry about hiding his powers. He looked at Coma and said with a sly smile that he had a special task for him. Coma winced, already uneasy. He didn't like the sound of that at all. Meanwhile, the goblin licked his sword blade with malice. Two vicious wolves stood growling before him. The few remaining warriors positioned themselves between the civilians and the monsters. Connor cursed internally. There were still people here? He had assumed everyone had been evacuated. He assessed the situation. It would now be nearly impossible to get the villagers to safety, especially with this many monsters. If it had only been a few, maybe. Panic gripped him. Was this really going to be the end? Just then, the goblin charged at him. But in the next moment, Connor countered and knocked him back with his weapon. The blade dripped with goblin blood. Blinding flashes of energy erupted around him, and the weapon returned to Connor's hand with a surge of power. A message appeared. Powerful blow. Deals immense damage to enemy forces. Connor charged straight into the next wave of creatures. He unleashed another devastating strike. Shocked, he murmured. It was the same effect again, but now he fully understood how the ability worked. He turned and ordered the remaining residents to be evacuated immediately. One warrior hesitated, saying it didn't feel right to leave everything to a mercenary. They would help. Connor nodded in appreciation, replying with a sincere thank you. His eyes widened slightly at their resolve. A new system alert lit up. Mortality. Lowers enemy defense and resistance. Exhaustion. Gradually depletes enemy health and mana. A brilliant magic circle formed under Connor's feet. Connor said aloud that, in truth, he preferred fighting alone. It gave him more freedom. The warrior looked at him in disbelief. But Connor clarified that he understood their concerns. The man handed him a small item, saying it wasn't much, but it might come in handy. Connor accepted it gratefully. The warrior shouted that they were heading out with the rest of the villagers and wished him good luck. Meanwhile, Connor reflected. It probably didn't matter if NPCs saw his powers. He had used them before, yet he still felt uneasy about it. Suddenly, Connor's eyes snapped open in alarm. A wolf had clamped its jaws around his weapon. The goblin was rapidly closing in from the other side. Connor shoved the wolf away and narrowly dodged the goblin's incoming strike. He smirked. Mortality seemed to be working quite well against them. The goblin lunged at him again, filled with rage. A voice questioned why he was struggling to keep balance. Connor muttered, continuing his attack. Why didn't the goblin retreat if he was in such pain? He had hit the goblin's leg earlier, and now it slipped. Still, he pressed on, though. Connor grabbed the monster by the head, snarling that he wasn't about to let it escape. His eyes burned with fury, but even amid the tension, he managed to smile. This new capsule felt incredible. He could perceive enemy movements with striking clarity now. Monsters dove toward his back. Thanks to the rigorous training with his mentor, he had significantly improved his reflexes. But now, it struck him. He could instinctively dodge nearly any incoming strike. One wolf recoiled in terror. A voice sneered, saying he had never seen wealthy players who could actually fight well. He went on, newest capsules or not, they were usually worthless in capable hands. Lightning-fast strikes tore through the monsters. Triple kill. A system alert flashed. Level up. He had reached level. But Connor frowned. It felt like he had slain a vast number of monsters, and still only reached level after level 20. Progress clearly slowed down. Toma came sprinting toward him, yelling his name. A horde of monsters chased after them, and Koma shouted if this wasn't more than enough already. Connor just smiled, replying that, sure. Leveling up was hard, but what mattered most was being surrounded by enemies. As wolves lunged, a glowing magic circle formed beneath him. Somewhere else, a voice snarled. The outsider rat had returned. The goblin seethed with rage. He muttered that Connor was a growing threat, and if they didn't crush him now, he would become a serious problem. The goblin added that, unlike the weaklings crawling beneath him, he alone ruled from the throne. Chuck stared tensely at the goblin. His thoughts raced. Was the goblin referring to Connor as the rat from the outside world? If so, Connor needed more time to level up. This green menace must not be allowed to escape. Chuck called out angrily, taunting the goblin. Where was he going? Was he running? Face him like a warrior? Or was he going to turn tail? He threatened to turn him into meat pie. The goblin smirked, mocking Chuck, calling him a coward, a man who couldn't even protect his king. Grabbing the elderly man, the goblin dared Chuck to try saving him. He was curious. How long could this old man last? Chuck clenched his jaw, realizing grimly that the old man didn't have much time left. In his mind, the image of Connor flashed. He needed to hurry. Flashing back 30 minutes earlier, Koma had protested in frustration, shouting that he wanted no part of this. He reminded them that he was a great spirit, valuable and irreplaceable. What if he got captured? Connor calmly replied they had no other option. Did Koma want a master who ran from every danger? Connor warned that if they ran, everyone here would die. Koma yelled that he shouldn't be dragged into every one of his battles. But Connor extended his fist, telling him he wasn't alone. This was their fight. With a faint smile, Connor looked at him again. Great spirit, Koma. Koma let out a long sigh, then bumped fists with him, saying fine, but he'd better make him some treats afterward. Connor promised, deal. The scene continues in the present. Koma scowled, clearly annoyed, and Connor quickly apologized. The hamster, perched on his head, complained that he had nearly died while fleeing from the monsters. And that was it. He swore never to help again. Connor just smiled, calling Koma a good guy and reminding him they really had no other choice. He added that at least they had taken down every serious threat and could finally rest. Koma proudly noted that the victory was thanks to him. Behind them, the remains of the monsters lay scattered in piles. Connor opened a water bottle and casually asked about his other request. Toma then brought up the Goblin Lord. Though he hadn't seen the creature directly, he was sure it had been there. Connor encouraged him to go on. Toma explained that while fleeing from a mob of enraged goblins and mutants, he had passed close to the castle. His eyes widened at the memory. He recalled a horrifying aura radiating from within. Koma added that although he couldn't enter the castle, he was certain the Goblin Lord was inside. He had taken control of the stronghold, which was strange. Typically, when a kingdom is under siege, someone of the king's rank would be evacuated. And yet, the king was still inside, and even the commander-in-chief was nowhere to be seen. Connor began walking, stating that they had to hurry. Koma asked, surprised, if they were heading out again already. Connor turned and confirmed it. The castle could be dangerous, so he told Koma to stay behind. He'd be back soon. Koma nodded in reluctant agreement. As the hamster looked around at the heap of fallen beasts, he froze. Something had just moved. A voice suddenly called out, urging him to stop. It was on his side. Meanwhile, Connor approached the castle, recognizing it as the royal keep of the Burman Kingdom. A chilling aura pulsed from within. He realized it would be reckless to charge through the main entrance. Just then, Connor turned around. He spotted Koma behind him and asked what he was doing here. The hamster said he had decided to come along. Connor reminded him that this was dangerous. Toma admitted he was scared, but that was exactly why he couldn't let Connor go in alone. Connor smirked. Was he really about to cry? Koma hopped onto his shoulder and asked if he had a plan. Connor blinked. What plan? Koma pressed on. Even if he was stronger now, the Goblin Lord was no ordinary foe. What if none of his attacks worked? Connor admitted that was a fair point, but time was against them. He crouched, preparing to leap. Then with sudden speed, he launched himself forward, shouting that sometimes there's no time to plan. Sometimes you just kick the door down. A scream rang out from within. Toma flew after him in a panic. Connor landed. The hamster scolded him, calling him insane. Why not just open the door instead of smashing through it? Connor hushed him. A moment passed, then Connor asked, "What's that?" He blinked in surprise. It was Sir Chuck. The knight calmly said he knew Connor would return. Connor rushed over, worried, and asked about his arm and why he hadn't evacuated. Chuck looked at him solemnly and said that no matter the danger, he was a knight. His duty was to protect the king until the very end. Connor's thoughts burned with rage, so the king was in danger too. A sinister voice sneered that it was him, the pest interfering in his plans. Connor averted his gaze. The Goblin Lord now stood before him, declaring that Connor was the only human to have lasted this long against his monsters. Now he understood why this insignificant insect had been stalling. The goblin aimed his weapon at Connor, asking mockingly as if the game was still ongoing. Nate let out a cold laugh and told him to drop the act. He hissed, "Did Connor truly think he was that foolish?" The goblin continued, stating that the knights had given their lives just to buy him time to grow stronger. Connor glared back. Nate scoffed. What good was that if they all died for nothing? Chuck cried out, urging Connor to ignore him. They had done only what honor demanded. Connor called out his name. The voice added that the old man lying there was the king himself. Chuck confirmed it. The lifeless body beside them was once the monarch. Connor ordered him to stay put and not move. Chuck, still trying to help, warned him not to fall for the goblin's provocations. But Connor stepped forward. The goblin laughed, questioning if his pride had made him reckless enough to attack. Swinging his massive axe, the Goblin Lord snarled, "This is why weak humans deserve to be wiped out." Connor narrowed his eyes and activated speed control, slowing the goblin's movement, attack speed, and casting. Magical energy swirled around the creature. The goblin's grin faded. Was this just a fluke, or had it been planned? Connor, smiling, called out to him. Then he brushed the goblin's tendrils from a hand he was gripping, Chuck's severed hand. Furious, the goblin growled. No one had the right to command him. With a roar, he lunged at Connor. Connor leaped into the air as magical sparks crackled around them. The magic surrounded Nate, flinging him back. The monster landed roughly, stunned. This wasn't just chaos. Connor had become faster. Energy spun around the goblin's limbs. No, he realized, he was being slowed down. His body felt heavy and unresponsive. The spell transformed into an opening. The goblin screamed, demanding to know what was happening. Connor, cradling the fallen king, remarked that the speed control skill worked better than he'd expected. Chuck called out to him. Connor handed over the severed hand, saying it could never be reattached. But somehow, it felt like it belonged to Chuck. He gently laid the king on the floor and said Chuck and the others had sacrificed themselves for this moment. He would not let that be in vain. Connor told Coma to stop hiding and get the survivors out. Coma nodded and agreed. Chuck struggled to his feet, grateful for Connor's help, but reminded him he was carrying the king, so he could be a little more careful. Coma tugged at the king, replying that victory was more important. Connor thought to himself, this was the moment that truly mattered. He glanced away, wondering what remained to be done. He knew. He had to finish it. The goblin growled that Connor had killed his monsters and stolen his prize. There would be no mercy. But Connor was calm, holding magical chains in his hands. He smiled and said, then let's have some fun. The Goblin Lord bared his teeth and struggled violently, trying to shatter the restraints. He swung his axe, charging at Connor, but the hero was faster and evaded. Then, gathering all his strength, Connor unleashed a flurry of lightning-fast strikes into the monster's body. Writhing from the pain, the goblin glanced down. Then, unleashing a guttural roar, he struck Connor hard with the hilt of his weapon. As Connor struggled to his feet, he realized the speed control skill was working, but just barely. The level gap was taking its toll. The goblin approached with a cruel grin and mocked him. Where was all that arrogance now? Flashing a wicked smile, he jeered, calling Connor a fool for ever thinking he could win. Laughing maniacally, he said death would be too kind. He'd first sever every limb, then display Connor's head on a spear. Gritting his teeth, Connor admitted the truth. The goblin was right. Speed control alone wouldn't win the fight. He needed real offensive power. A system window popped up in front of him. He thought bitterly that speed control drained far too much mana. Had he known this, he would have been more cautious using it. As the system message faded, Connor lunged forward. He told himself he'd wait for the perfect opportunity. The goblin mocked him for finally fighting like a man, not a rat. The goblin reached out, sneering. Was that all he had? Any more tricks? Their weapons clashed violently. Connor winced from the forceful recoil, while the goblin laughed, enjoying his struggle. Waving his axe menacingly, the goblin taunted him, time to pull his head out of the clouds. Connor held up his mace defensively, desperately trying to parry the blows, but the goblin scoffed. Brains or not, Connor could never hope to beat him. In an instant, the goblin seized Connor by the throat and slammed him into the stone wall. Blood spewed from Connor's mouth on impact. With a heavy step on his stomach, the goblin growled that humans had always looked down on goblins like filth. Then he admitted, goblins weren't born superior, but as he pressed his foot into Connor's chest, he vowed that things would change. They would force humanity, and all so-called superior races, to kneel. A vivid image formed in his mind. Him, seated on a tiger before an obedient army. One day, goblins would rule. Smiling with mad conviction, he claimed this dream defined him. Not like a pathetic mercenary chasing trivial goals. Still defiant, Connor smirked and replied that while he might be a star, his dream was nothing more than a joke. Seeing the goblin's furious expression, Connor added with a cold grin that even if goblins bathed, they'd remain the same, filthy and lowly. The Lord's grip tightened on his weapon, growling. Those must have been his final words. He raised his axe to finish him off, vowing to erase the insect before him. But Connor's eyes narrowed. Now, with a burst of power, glowing blue chains coiled around the goblin. At that moment, Connor deactivated speed control. A violent explosion followed, shaking the ground. As the smoke cleared, the goblin scowled. His body suddenly felt lighter, and his weapon was stuck. As the protagonist moved closer, the goblin wondered if this pesky little rat was provoking him on purpose. Within seconds, Connor unleashed a flurry of powerful strikes. With a forceful swing of his mace, he landed a solid blow to the Goblin Lord's chin. Abruptly, the goblin turned and let out a loud whistle. Connor froze, eyes widening in surprise at what was coming. From behind the wall, a massive tiger burst forth, slamming into Connor and launching him backward. He crashed hard onto the ground. The goblin stepped forward with a smirk, remarking that Connor had come close to defeating him. Glancing back, he admitted with surprise that he hadn't expected such resistance. As his hands began to glow ominously, he declared that this was where it ended. Grinning as he mounted his beast, the goblin proclaimed that with the full power of mind control, he would create a mutant so powerful it would tear Connor apart. The tiger sprang forward with terrifying speed. With a devastating swipe, it shattered everything in its path. Connor was hurled into a nearby wall from the impact. The goblin laughed triumphantly, shouting that the castle would serve as Connor's tomb. But Connor, his eyes steady, replied that it was the goblin who had dug his own grave. Behind him, a glowing magical scale materialized as he called out the goblin's mistake, daring to call him a slacker. A system message flashed. Contempt of the strong activated. Damage output increased, damage received decreased. Continuation of above. The buff significantly enhanced his combat abilities. Looking his foe in the eye, Connor firmly rejected the insult. He wasn't a slacker. The goblin froze in fear as Connor calmly declared himself a master of debuffs. In a flash, a towering pillar of light pierced both the goblin and his beast straight through. Connor asserted with conviction that he would rise to the pinnacle of this world. A system prompt confirmed the completion of the quest. Protect the kingdom of Burma. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the day finally came to a close. The scene shifted back to the castle. An exhausting day had ended at last. Connor gazed at the lifeless bodies of the goblin and the tiger. Staring in silence, he reflected on how everything seemed to shut down once the Lord was slain. Someone had struck the goblin's head with a hammer to ensure he stayed dead. The warrior exhaled in relief as the last monster fell. The rest were dealt with by the players who had arrived just in time. Slowly, the city began to recover. Survivors, though injured, started helping with the rebuilding of the kingdom. One person was already drafting plans for a new home. Meanwhile, Connor rested beside a tent, an apple in his hand, letting out a deep breath of satisfaction. Life was good, at least for now. Looking up, he remarked that no elixir in real life could compare to one that revives you from death. Such power was beyond imagining. With a faint smile, he still couldn't quite believe it all happened. Recalling the battle, he wondered how he'd managed to defeat the Goblin Lord solo. Without enough mana, the key skill, Contempt of the Strong, would have been unusable. He remembered activating it at the last moment, certain the castle would be his grave. Thankfully, death here was only virtual. A system message appeared again, explaining the Contempt of the Strong skill in detail. The greater the level gap, the more powerful its effect. Though incredibly strong, its 12-hour cooldown meant it had to be used with caution. As he read the system message, Connor reflected on how challenging it would be to keep his abilities hidden while fighting. Just then, someone approached and asked if he could already walk again. Connor greeted the familiar voice with a wide smile. It was a bald man who remarked, amazed, that Connor seemed fully recovered. Standing up slowly, Connor explained that he just needed more rest. The man, clearly relieved, joked that he was already tired of doing nothing, and added that his master had ordered him to escort Connor to the castle. Hearing that, Connor admitted he still felt sore, like he'd been through hell. The man stepped closer and said he was just grateful he arrived in time. Otherwise, Connor might not have made it. As for the master, he was now receiving treatment and slowly getting better. With a grin, the man added that Connor had always been known as a tough one. Potter, pausing as he noticed the bandages on his friend's arm, commented with concern that if he'd gotten there sooner, maybe the injury could have been avoided. But the man waved it off. He said there was no need to apologize. Touching the stump where his hand had once been, he spoke with quiet pride, that they survived thanks to Connor, and losing a hand was a small price to pay for saving the kingdom. Connor smiled and said sincerely that he truly was a knight in every sense. The bald man sighed and told them to cut the chatter. They needed to get moving. As they began walking, he reminded Connor that everyone was waiting for him. The scene shifted to an old man whose body trembled with age. He introduced himself as the owner of the estate and praised the hero who had saved them. Connor approached and introduced himself. The Baron responded warmly, saying Connor bore a name worthy of a true hero. Overwhelmed with emotion, the old man fell to his knees, expressing deep gratitude for saving the estate. But Connor gently told him there was no need for that. Suddenly, a sharp crack came from the Baron's back. He collapsed to the ground and the guards rushed to help. Watching this unfold, Connor turned to his friend and questioned if this was really the strong man he'd heard about. The Baron lowered his eyes and muttered an apology. Struggling to stay upright, he admitted he still didn't feel well, but insisted on expressing his thanks. Connor, looking forward solemnly, said it wasn't necessary. He was just doing his job as a mercenary. The conduct of the ravens had left him with little choice, but the Baron replied firmly that intentions didn't matter, whether Connor acted out of duty or his own will. What mattered was that he risked his life to protect them. If not for him, their tranquil estate would have fallen to the goblins. Looking toward the courtyard, the Baron invited Connor to follow. He had prepared a gift. Hearing that, Connor's face lit up. At last, he was about to receive his well-earned reward. He eagerly followed the Baron, thinking that, given how hard the quest had been, the reward better match the effort. The scene transitioned into a dungeon, where the Baron guided him through dim, echoing corridors. As Connor glanced around, he realized this was where he had fought the Goblin Lord. Only now did he grasp just how massive the hall truly was. He came to a stop, noticing what looked like an ancient altar. The Baron then explained that this was the treasure room, built by one of his ancestors, an avid collector of rare antiques. Picking up a small box, the Baron explained that most of the treasures once stored here had either been sold or destroyed. There was barely anything left. But as he handed the box over, he noted that one item of true value had remained. Suddenly, radiant light burst from the box's interior. Connor stared ahead, taken aback by the unexpected glow. Floating before him was a scroll, which the Baron explained was a coupon for access to the legendary Mercedes workshop. As he looked at it, visions of a wizard and a blacksmith flashed through Connor's mind. He thought about how, since ancient times, the continent had always been defined by the synergy of magic, alchemy, and metallurgy, disciplines that evolved and intertwined across the centuries. A brilliant flash sparked again, and he reflected on how the boundaries between those arts had faded, eventually merging into one discipline, giving birth to powerful artifacts. Connor envisioned a vast collection of enchanted weapons, armor, and relics. The harmony of magical alchemy and blacksmithing had given rise to several major workshops that specialized in artifact creation. The scene shifted in his mind to the renowned Autotronic Technical Workshop. Then came the infamous Vermeulen Murder Workshop, and finally the iconic Mercedes Workshop. Envisioning them all, he thought about how these three were known throughout the lands as the finest artifact workshops in existence. As he stared at the scroll glowing in his hands, Connor realized this Mercedes Workshop coupon was his reward for defeating the Goblin Lord. His mouth dropped open as a system notification appeared. It was a workshop upgrade coupon. The description said it allowed any artifact to be upgraded 12 times in a row, with a guaranteed 100% success rate and no level restrictions, for just 1,000 gold. Connor was stunned, thinking that such a powerful reward, 12 guaranteed upgrades, was incredibly generous. Just then, the Baron approached and shared a story from 700 years ago. He described a time when the Mercedes Workshop was just a struggling startup, barely surviving in a small building. In a desperate attempt to raise funds, its founder had sold upgrade coupons for 1,000 gold each. Back then, that was a hefty sum, and most people scoffed at the idea of investing in what they considered a worthless hole in the ground. But one man did invest. The Baron's ancestor, a white-mustached man, purchased the very coupon Connor now held. Turning away, the Baron confessed he didn't know if his ancestor had foreseen the future or was simply fond of collecting odd trinkets. But that purchase turned out to be his wisest investment. Facing Connor again, he added that it felt right, as though the coupon had finally found its destined owner. Connor looked ahead solemnly, admitting that the gift was unbelievably generous. By modern standards, a single coupon like this could be worth hundreds of millions in gold. The Baron replied that it had no current claimant. The Baron pictured his family crest and explained that he had once intended to leave the coupon as a legacy for his son's lineage. With a sigh, he admitted that his son turned out to be too weak to carry that burden. Connor quietly thought to himself that he hardly considered himself strong either. The Baron, still staring at the crest, said he had one request, something he hoped Connor could fulfill. Recalling the moment he regained consciousness, Connor remembered being dragged by the collar from the castle. The Baron recalled, eyes wide with emotion, how he had seen Connor's fierce, unwavering determination that day. His eyes locked forward, burning with resolve. He remembered Connor clenching his fist, convinced in that moment that he was destined to become the strongest hero on the continent. Looking at him now, the Baron asked Connor to make a promise, that when that day came, he would lend his strength to help his son. With a warm smile, he said that just like his own ancestor once took a chance, he too was investing in a future hero. He valued strength, but only when it came with wisdom. Glancing at the coupon in his hands, Connor asked how he could possibly refuse after such a gesture. Still smiling, he agreed. He would protect the Baron's son. A system message appeared, confirming a new quest had begun. A simple one, tied to the Baron's request. With that, Connor exited the dungeon. Holding the glowing ticket in his hand, he wondered aloud what he should do with it. He imagined a mountain of gold, thinking he could auction off the coupon for hundreds of millions, enough to clear all his debts and buy his mother a new home. Then, in his mind, he pictured his old, strict teacher yelling at him, calling him a fool for focusing on immediate gains and missing the bigger picture. Smirking to himself, Connor thought the teacher would have smacked him upside the head too. Shaking off the thought, he slid the ticket into the system storage and muttered that he should think long-term. He could always sell it later if needed. Suddenly, something struck him. He hadn't seen his helmet all day. Where had it gone? Frowning, he muttered that he hoped it hadn't gotten into trouble again. The scene shifts to a house somewhere nearby. Inside, a small hamster looks up with a fearful expression. Trembling, he turns and begins to shake his body, declaring that he's had enough. A man watching him crosses his arms and chuckles, saying the hamster dances well, just like his daughter used to. Komar retorted that he doesn't dance for free. A net suddenly dropped over him. The captors laughed, saying that such a performance deserves payment. He could work it off by chopping wood. The hamster, annoyed but polite, said he appreciated their generosity and was eager to show off more of his talents, unlike his idiotic owner who never valued them. Just then, a familiar voice echoed, filled with mock offense. It was Connor who had overheard the insult. He snatched the hamster up by the scruff and said he had been worried. So this was where he'd been, moonlighting as a dancer. Toma, the hamster, shouted in protest, saying what else could he do with a cheapskate owner? If Connor wasn't going to buy him snacks, he shouldn't expect obedience. Looking irritated, Connor pointed out that he thought Toma only ate magic stones. Toma huffed that they tasted like sand, and he only ate them to recharge his strength. A man nearby remarked sarcastically that this was their hero, then asked where he'd disappeared to. Connor walked to the table and calmly said he'd been handling some business at the castle. One of the guys reached out and teased him. He was always so busy. Had he gotten the quest reward yet? Connor grinned and said, not yet. The man laughed, saying this was the biggest reward they'd ever seen in the game, and joked that their friend who logged off early would be kicking himself. But Connor kept the coupon a secret. He decided it was better to let them stay cheerful without knowing the full truth. At that moment, another man approached, relieved to see Connor finally back. Handing him a sack of gold, he said he was just glad everyone had made it through safely. Though the building's reconstruction had cost him a fortune, he figured it was all worth it now. The man handed the bag of gold to Connor, stating it was the 5,000 gold they had agreed upon. Connor apologized, adding that if he had broken anything during the mission, it certainly wasn't intentional. Leaning in, the man whispered that he'd heard about Connor receiving a special reward at the castle. He assured him not to worry. There was no need for the other mercenaries to know. Connor nodded in gratitude for his discretion. Placing the bag on the table, the man said he had a question to ask. He stepped closer and asked Connor if he knew what had happened to the Goblin Lord's body. When he arrived at the castle, the corpse was gone. The man explained that the remains were most likely displayed near the lake. He described the gruesome sight, torn and strung up for all to see. The Baron had done it to send a message to any surviving goblins. Return, and this is your fate. With a grim look, the man said he'd caught a glimpse of the scene that morning. It was truly unsettling. Connor exhaled, thinking that the Baron was quite the showman. Turning away, he felt it was time to bid farewell to the estate. Glancing around, he reflected on how much had happened in such a short time. He'd gained multiple levels. His teacher must have known this would happen. Perhaps that's why he'd sent him here. With a small smile, he acknowledged that the master had given him a great start. Suddenly, someone stepped out from the crowd. A familiar voice bellowed, "Apprentice!" The entire bar groaned, clutching their ears at the sheer volume. A man muttered irritably that he was nearly deaf, especially after all the beer he'd had since morning. Staring ahead in disbelief, Connor wondered if that thunderous voice really belonged to his master. The scene shifts to the street outside. A man in the crowd marveled, saying he had never seen someone with such a high level before. Connor pushed through the people, saying he needed to get moving. The crowd stared ahead in stunned confusion. Suddenly, a towering man appeared before Connor. At first glance, Connor thought this certainly wasn't his teacher. The stranger threw his arms open and exclaimed loudly that he had finally found his student. Connor stood frozen, staring in surprise for a few seconds. Then he pointed at himself in confusion. Perched on Connor's shoulder, the hamster asked if that was really his master. He looked incredibly powerful. Connor, still puzzled, said he had never seen this man before in his life. He didn't look like a random madman or a vagrant, though. Just then, Connor's eyes widened as a system notification appeared. Room of Insight activated. Another message followed. This was a named NPC of the human race, and his level was an astonishing. The man beamed and asked Connor what he was seeing now. Did he understand who stood before him? With a confident flourish, he drew a sword from his back. Raising it high, he declared that he was one of the legendary 5 heavenly stars. A blinding flash of light erupted, illuminating the entire street. Connor stared forward, stunned. Had he just heard what he thought he did? In his mind, he visualized a map of the continent. The Heavenly Stars, a title reserved for the 5 most powerful master-level individuals in existence. It was almost unheard of to encounter one in such a remote, unremarkable place. Reflecting on how he met his own master, Connor realized it had also happened far from civilization, deep in the forest. Perhaps such legendary NPCs only revealed themselves in forgotten corners of the world. The man approached Connor and commented on how impressive it was that his master had such a strong body. Connor pulled back warily, asking why the stranger kept insisting on calling himself his teacher. The man replied calmly that if Connor was a student, then by default, he must be a teacher. With a hearty laugh, he added that Connor must be quite young, still naive and ignorant about the world. His sleeve slipped as he gestured, noting that Connor might have heard of the 5 heavenly stars, but clearly didn't grasp their true significance, so he'd explain it to him. To his surprise, Connor confidently replied that he already knew everything. Reaching out, Connor said that the 5 heavenly stars were the top 5 masters on the continent, each wielding tremendous power. The man frowned, displeased, and questioned how Connor could act so calm if he truly knew who he was. Connor, slightly embarrassed, apologized for his delayed reaction. Suddenly, the aura of his true master appeared behind him, and Connor declared that he already had a teacher. The man instinctively jumped back in alarm. Then, regaining composure, he asked what difference that made. Connor could just abandon his old master and become his disciple instead. But Connor, smiling coolly, warned him to choose his words wisely. His master was far stronger than this self-proclaimed teacher. He had been taught the secrets of invincibility. The man scoffed, insisting that he was the stronger one. His own master was one of the 3 honorable ones. Sarcastically, Connor replied that his teacher was above even them. The man looked up in disbelief. Was there really someone more powerful than the 3 honorable ones? Connor said it seemed he wasn't aware of such a being yet. Raising a finger, Connor said that he was referring to someone truly great. The man's face paled for a moment, then he exhaled and chuckled, asking what exactly he meant by great. Laughing as he gripped his sword, he mocked the statement, calling it adorable. Then, with full strength, he slammed his sword into the ground, sending a tremor through the earth. With a grim and serious look, he declared that only someone like him could be called great. A system notification flashed before Connor. An urgent quest had begun. He now had to win a duel against one of the 5 heavenly stars. If he lost, he would be forced to become the man's disciple. The scene transitioned to a flashback of a man named John, 26 years old, resting a massive sword on his shoulder. John effortlessly cleaved through a tree, reminiscing about how he carved his path with a sword in his younger days. His blade glowed with blue mana as he unleashed a flurry of devastating strikes. His aides watched him in silence while John, catching his breath, wore a look of steely focus. He recalled how countless hours of brutal training, marked by sweat and blood, had led him to the peak of swordsmanship, which he finally achieved at the age of but the watching elves looked on with quiet resentment. And John admitted to himself that despite all his power, it didn't fill the emptiness in his heart. As he crossed a bridge, he realized that this hollowness was something internal, not external. Looking toward the sky, he wondered why he still didn't feel any joy, even after reaching the goal he had long desired. Suddenly, he saw a young boy training alone by a river. As he observed, he offered advice, telling the boy to relax his shoulders and focus properly. In that moment, John was struck by something. He imagined himself standing back to back with the child and thought, no matter how perfect his techniques, they'd mean nothing if he died without passing them on. That day, his journey across the continent began, with one goal in mind, to find a worthy disciple. Watching the young man gripping a blade, John remarked that while his control over mana was decent, his sense for actual combat was severely lacking. Glancing at another shirtless trainee, John sighed. This one lacked determination altogether. No matter how much time he spent training, he'd never amount to anything. Then, looking solemnly at a grave nearby, John wondered if fate had taken away someone truly gifted. Gripping his head in frustration, John realized that raising a proper disciple would take at least 20 years, and at 130 years old, he might not live long enough to complete that task. Staring at a map of the continent, John noted that he had already searched everywhere. Only one last place remained. Now, standing before Connor, he declared that this boy was his final hope. From the moment he laid eyes on him, he felt it in his bones. Pointing dramatically at Connor, John shouted that this troublesome brat clearly needed a teacher, and that teacher was him. Furious, Connor demanded to know why everyone kept making decisions for him and flatly refused to become John's student. John let out a long sigh, clearly annoyed. He replied that he wasn't the type to offer his teachings to just anyone. If Connor truly didn't want to be his disciple, he'd have to prove it, by winning the bet. Connor, growing more irritated, thought to himself that this old man was unbearably persistent. Glancing at John's confident smirk, Connor wondered how he could possibly fight someone so absurdly strong. At that moment, a system prompt appeared. An urgent quest. To win the bet against John, one of the 5 heavenly stars. If he failed, he would be forced to become his apprentice. Connor began warming up and asked what exactly the bet entailed. Without turning around, John stated that the task was simple. Connor had to hit him. Connor blinked in disbelief at how easy it sounded. Still facing away, John clarified, Connor would have only one attempt. He could use any method of attack. If he managed to inflict even 1 point of damage, he would win. Standing calmly, John reassured him not to stress about it. With a slight grin, he said that since Connor was weak, he wouldn't even bother using defensive abilities. With pride, he declared that his body had been trained to perfection, without a single weak spot. Connor, now serious, asked if John planned to use his sword. John laughed and teased that if Connor was already doubting himself, maybe he should just give up to avoid wasting time. Connor asked if he even knew his name. John looked away, replying that a name wasn't important. They'd figure it out later. Connor gripped his weapon tightly and said that if John didn't even care to know his name, then he wasn't interested in Connor as a person, only as a vessel to dump his knowledge into. Connor activated several of his abilities, preparing for the strike. Standing within a magic circle, he shouted that he'd rather die than become John's student. John chuckled, replying that those were the kind of words one should only say after winning. Connor grinned and told him not to worry. Then, with fierce determination, he launched himself at John, declaring that he would never lose to someone like him. John, watching closely, assessed the situation calmly. He understood Connor's tactic, focusing all his power into a single strike, using debuffs to weaken him. But such tricks wouldn't work on someone like him. Clenching his fist, John prepared to respond. John braced himself for the incoming strike, confident he'd be able to block it. He was sure he could predict exactly where Connor would aim. But to his shock, something unexpected happened. The debuff had been applied to his groin, an area he hadn't accounted for. Connor, with a blazing fury, delivered the blow. John let out a stunned, agonized scream. A resounding impact echoed through the air. Nearby villagers, watching from the street, commented that the two were making some kind of bet. But the thick dust cloud obscured the view. Smiling, one of them questioned if the two were really on the same level. George replied that considering Connor had defeated the Goblin Lord on his own, that was unlikely. George himself seemed genuinely impressed by what had just unfolded. Within the lingering dust, John stood silently. His face was stoic, unreadable. Connor looked at him and remarked that John may have trained every inch of his body, but he had neglected the most vulnerable spot. At that moment, Connor received a system message saying the quest had been completed and he could now claim a reward. Glancing at the notification, he realized that winning the bet was, in fact, the key to finishing the quest. He selected the reward option and jokingly hoped it wouldn't be something tied to the stubborn old man. Koma, confused, asked what was going on. Holding Koma in his arms, Connor asked if he was all right. Koma groaned, Saying his head was still ringing from John's shriek, Connor chuckled and let out a sigh, smiling to himself. Turning away from John, he said he wouldn't be bothering them anymore. Taken aback, Connor suddenly remembered something important. Koma said he was heading to the spot where the Goblin Lord's body had fallen. Connor exclaimed that he needed to collect the blood quickly, before it spoiled. It could fetch a high price. Koma shrugged and called him a scavenger. Connor countered, saying he preferred to think of himself as someone planning for the future. As they moved through rocky terrain, Connor thought to himself that this must be the ancient ruins of Sok, once part of the McCullen Kingdom, famous as the site where a level 500 python monster had appeared 3 decades ago. Surveying the area, he noted that these ruins were now a popular hunting zone for adventurers between levels 40 and E. The streets were bustling with people, and Connor recognized that the local mercenary guild was also based there. In the crowded plaza, people were calling out, seeking teammates for upcoming missions. A visibly frustrated girl was also searching for party members. A boy holding a sword approached and asked if they had room for him. The girl replied that they were actually in need of a buffer. The boy was caught off guard by the rejection. The girl bowed and apologized sincerely. She frowned and muttered to herself, annoyed that despite the crowd, not a single buffer was to be found. But then her eyes lit up. She noticed that many of the people she'd seen earlier had gathered here, all looking for the same thing. Teammates. The girl sighed, disappointed, realizing that she'd probably have to give up on hunting today. But then something caught her off guard. She saw Connor walking by and was struck with curiosity. She'd never seen him before. As she observed him, a blue mortar spell activated from her hand. A gentle blue aura enveloped Connor's body. The girl stared in astonishment, clearly not expecting this reaction. Acting on impulse, she reached out and grabbed his hand, calling to him. Connor turned around, surprised. She smiled and asked if he'd consider joining their party. Meanwhile, Connor pressed a button on the ATM. As the shop door opened, he warmed up his shoulders and thought that, with everything at the Berman estate now finished, it was time to take care of things in the real world. He sighed, noting that most of his real-world time was spent dealing with debt, 200 million in bank credit and another 100 million at a shady loan office. He wondered how much interest had piled up by now. He imagined the angry debt collectors from before, guys who used to show up at his door nearly every day. Thankfully, now they'd gone quiet. Walking along the street, Connor muttered that no news was good news and hoped they never called him again. Suddenly, he noticed a car passing by with a man and woman inside. He stared, wondering just how expensive that car was. Connor thought back to his incredible luck during the Goblin Lord quest. Earning that kind of reward was unheard of for a low-level player. Looking at a stack of documents in his mind's eye, he mused that the in-game world, with its endless possibilities, was nothing like the real world. After reaching level 200, a flood of quests unlocked rare and valuable loot. He envisioned himself fighting a towering monster and thought about the potential for profit by helping lower-level players. A victorious image of a man raising a trophy popped into his head, proof that you could even become a professional gamer. Watching another player battling monsters, Connor thought that a sociable person could go far simply by becoming a streamer. Staring again at the luxury car, he reminded himself that success in the game could translate to real-world income, though for now, he only had his VR capsule. He imagined himself standing proudly next to a luxury car, dreaming of living in a high-rise penthouse. Gazing up at a nearby tower, he fantasized about meeting a beautiful woman and eventually marrying her. Just then, the same girl smiled and asked Connor if he wanted to join their party. Koma, noticing Connor's blank expression, teased him for standing like a statue. Snapping out of it, Connor stammered that he was just lost in thought and asked her to repeat what she said. Standing confidently before him, she explained that they were looking for a buffer. Connor was puzzled. How did she know his class? He always thought Master of Debuffs was considered a combat role. He tried to politely decline, his face serious. Koma smacked him and yelled that they were joining the party whether he liked it or not. Rubbing his own cheek, Koma muttered that Connor was hopeless. This girl was clearly a green flag. Perched on Connor's shoulder, Koma sarcastically asked if he planned to stay a lonely hermit, pointing out that he'd literally just fantasized about growing old with her and having grandkids. Connor frowned and muttered that all he had were debuff skills anyway. The cheerful girl approached Connor and explained that their damage dealers would be thrilled to have someone who could weaken enemies. With a hopeful smile, she gently asked if he'd consider joining their party. Connor looked at her, clearly uncertain and caught off guard. A radiant light filled the room. Meanwhile, warriors marched steadily down the street. The scene shifted to the western edge of the Sohawk ruins, where Connor followed the group at the rear. As he observed a shimmering projection, he reflected that a once prosperous kingdom had once stood there, until 30 years ago, when a colossal python had reduced it to rubble. He envisioned the monstrous serpent, recalling how it was eventually slain. However, the immense mana left behind from its corpse had seeped into the land, giving rise to countless monsters. Rubbing his forehead, Connor concluded that this was precisely why the area had become such a popular hunting zone. A teammate whispered to Mary. Skeptical about Connor's level, he hadn't even reached 31 yet. Smiling calmly, Mary assured him that Connor didn't need to fight directly. His job was simply to hang back and apply debuffs to enemies. She promised to keep him safe. The guy gave a weary sigh, unsure whether Mary was kind or simply naive. He'd never worked with a debuffer before and had no idea if it would even work out. Mary winked and said that buffers were so rare nowadays, it was worth giving this a shot. Suddenly, she was forced to dodge a swift, powerful attack. Connor's eyes widened. This was clearly one of the monsters born from the corrupted mana of the python. The creature radiated electricity. It was a lizard-like monster. A system message popped up, warning that it was a spirit-type creature, spawned by python energy. These monsters always hunted in groups. Lowering one's guard was fatal. Frowning, Mary shouted commands, telling the tanks to intercept the charging beasts. The warriors drew their weapons, ready for battle. Turning back to Connor, Mary instructed him to stay behind and place debuffs on the approaching lizards. With a stoic expression, Connor nodded and accepted the command. The lizards opened their mouths, unleashing bursts of energy. A frontline fighter deflected the oncoming attacks with precision. He swung his sword, generating a slicing vortex of air. A girl called out from behind, reminding him that even tanks weren't invincible. The guy insisted he could manage, but admitted it was hard without a buffer or healer. Glancing at Connor, he thought bitterly that this wasn't a difficult fight. He questioned why Connor was even brought along. Covered in scratches and scorched marks, the fighter muttered that he'd done his part and suggested they wrap it up and move to the next target. Suddenly, something startled him. A volley of electric blasts surged toward him. He was hit and violently electrocuted. Mary watched in horror as the system message confirmed that the player, lover of beauties, had been killed. Fear gripped her as the situation turned dire. Before them stood an overwhelming swarm of lizards, advancing rapidly. Shaken, she gasped, "How many of these monsters were there?" As they looked around, Mary screamed that they needed to retreat immediately. A serious expression crossed her face. She had never seen so many enemies before. She pulled out rune-inscribed scrolls, realizing grimly that they had overestimated their strength. Only 4 of them remained. They had no choice but to use the scrolls. Hands casually tucked into his pockets, Connor asked her to hand one over. He questioned the point of wasting the scrolls of return without reason. As he turned, Connor remarked to himself that he hadn't misjudged her after all. The protagonist commented that while Mary was kind and generous, she could be naive, and should save the scroll for herself when she was truly in danger. Mary asked, distressed, how she could possibly abandon the others now. Connor removed one hand from his pocket and asked why anyone would run at this point. With a snap of his fingers, the protagonist noted casually that the situation wasn't dangerous at all. The others looked at him in shock, as a glowing magic circle appeared beneath their feet. Connor explained that he had already cast debuffs on the enemies. Mary was stunned. Grinning, the protagonist said it was time to enjoy themselves. The group engaged the monsters in combat. One of the guys shouted with excitement, urging everyone to attack. A thunderous blow rang out. He unleashed a flurry of strikes at the lizard-like creatures. Glancing back, he called out that these enemies were weak. They were falling to basic attacks. Connor clapped slowly, lounging atop a pillar. He reminded them, amused, that while they were having fun, the monster's attack power was still the same. A moment's carelessness, and they'd die, just like a tank. The protagonist smirked, thinking this was far more entertaining than expected. He could level up while staying safely out of reach. With satisfaction, he looked over the barrage of experience notifications. Connor mused aloud whether it was worth continuing. He was gaining easy rewards with little effort. Suddenly, a scream from Mary made the protagonist spin around in alarm. She had shielded him from a devastating strike. Turning to Connor, Mary asked if he was okay. Watching her in action, the protagonist noted her agility. If she'd chosen the Robe or Arthur class, she might have achieved far greater success. As he studied her, Connor thought again. The mage class didn't suit her at all. A new notification popped up. He had leveled up. The group looked at the projections with satisfaction. They all leveled up, and joked that if anyone saw it, they'd think they were using cheats. Connor walked up and asked if they enjoyed the hunt. The protagonist, covering his mouth, guessed they hadn't been thrilled about having him in their party. But clearly that had changed. One guy rushed up and said he had always believed Connor would become an essential part of the team. A girl added that it was truly refreshing. It was far better to have someone like him than to hunt with a buffalo or a priest. Another guy, offended, asked how she could compare Connor to such mudbloods. The protagonist reflected that these people were such flatterers. It made sense now why buffers often turned arrogant from all the praise. Smiling, the girl remarked that she'd never met anyone with a class like his before. With a look of surprise, she asked if it was some kind of hidden class. Holding his head in confusion, Connor remarked that if he really had a hidden class, he wouldn't be stuck here. He'd already be in a top guild, raking in money. Standing before the group, the protagonist clarified that while his class was unique, it wasn't impressive. Beyond casting debuffs, he couldn't do much. Connor showed them various class emblems and explained that all classes fall into 4 tiers, but it's nearly impossible to identify them clearly until a certain threshold is reached. Internally, the protagonist admitted he'd probably gone overboard with his abilities and needed to be more cautious going forward. Just then, Mary ran up and called out to Connor. She extended her hands, offering several gleaming crystals. She explained that they had gathered them during the hunt, and these were for him. The protagonist noticed a system message indicating that they were lower light crystals, formed from Python energy, containing a faint light attribute. Stunned, Connor said it was too much, but Mary replied that it was customary to share loot with the buffer, especially since the hunt's success was thanks to him. Reaching for the crystals, Connor expressed his sincere gratitude. Mary grabbed his hand. Smiling, she asked if he'd consider continuing to hunt with them. The protagonist realized these crystals were, in essence, a bribe. Sighing with a small smile, Connor accepted the offer, admitting that he was too lazy to keep finding new parties anyway. Mary shouted excitedly that he had agreed to stay in their team. The group erupted in joy, jumping and cheering. Watching them, Connor commented that sometimes it's good to take a break from all the chaos. Coma whispered that he only agreed because of Mary. A week had now passed since she joined the party. The scene shifted to the Sock Ruins, a refuge for adventurers. Standing before the towering structure, Connor told the group they'd be staying there for the night, praising their performance. Grabbing the door handle, the protagonist thought to himself that although there weren't any major events or quests here, unlike the Berman estate, it was still a solid place to train and learn new skills. He paced the room and glanced at Coma, noting that he had even made modest progress during their time together. Connor sat down on a couch, and Coma asked if he planned to return to his place. The protagonist answered that he did. He couldn't afford to waste the skills he had learned. Looking down at a small pile of crystals, he remarked that he had begun absorbing them, thanks to a newly acquired skill. A blue aura began to surround him. A message appeared. Attribute absorption activated. A radiant light poured out from the crystals. As the mana of light enveloped him, Connor closed his eyes and realized he had reached level 35 and gained the skill Attribute Absorption. A system message explained the skill. It allows the user to absorb elemental energy, increasing resistance to that element. With enough absorbed energy, certain skills can be enhanced. Connor reflected that, while it seemed like a simple resistance boost, its true value lay in its potential to strengthen other abilities. Reclining on the couch, the protagonist muttered that the real challenge was not knowing how far this path of skill enhancement could take him. Looking up, he thought that he might soon need to stop hunting with the party altogether. Connor reviewed his stats, realizing he only needed to level up one more skill to unlock a new ability. He figured that by tomorrow he'd achieve it, and then his hunting days would be over. His mind wandered back to Mary's innocent request that he keep hunting with them. The thought left him feeling awkward and uneasy. He collapsed onto the couch and groaned, saying he'd think everything through tomorrow. The next morning, Kim, as the protagonist exited his room, asked if everyone was already there. Opening his eyes, he was taken aback. He saw a huge crowd gathered outside. Turning to Coma, he asked if she had any idea what was going on. The group pointed excitedly at the protagonist, shouting that he was the master of devs. As the crowd began rushing toward him, he stood frozen. Dazed, Connor asked if everyone had gone mad. Mary suddenly grabbed his hand and started pulling him through the mass of people, weaving their way out of the chaos. Startled, Connor asked if that was really Mary. She glanced back and told him to hold on tight. In her hand, she clutched a glowing blue scroll. A beam of blue light suddenly burst forth onto the street. It landed with a loud impact, shaking the ground. Now standing elsewhere, Mary admitted she still hadn't gotten used to teleportation. Kneeling down, the protagonist realized they had returned to the site of their very first hunt. Smiling, Mary said she hadn't expected them to end up here again, but was glad she'd used the scroll of return. Connor asked her to explain what was happening. Instead of answering, she told him to look for himself. A glowing blue projection appeared in front of him. Connor watched as online discussions about him flooded the screen. With a downcast expression, Mary explained that someone had leaked footage of their hunt. Narrowing his eyes, the protagonist noted that Carl was the only one missing from the video. Mary agreed, frowning. She added that Carl had left the party just the day before and had likely uploaded the footage after traveling to another continent. She asked why he would do such a thing. Looking away, Connor muttered that there are always people who will call you brother and then betray you the next moment. A memory flashed in his mind, an embrace with Simon. But just as quickly, he recalled Simon pointing a staff at him, ready to strike. Anger surged within Connor, stung by Simon's betrayal. Mary, watching him from behind, quietly apologized. She said that if she hadn't asked him to join the party. Connor interrupted, assuring her she wasn't at fault. Carl was the one who had betrayed them, not her. Turning back to her, the protagonist sincerely thanked her for helping him escape the crowd. As they walked on, Mary asked what he planned to do now. Connor said he intended to level up one more time and leave. Rumors would only spread further, and he couldn't afford to stay much longer. A bead of sweat trickled down Mary's face. She bit her lower lip, torn by emotion. In a soft, hesitant voice, she called out to Connor. He stopped and turned to look at her. With a bittersweet smile, she asked if she could go with him. As they wandered through the familiar ruins, Mary remarked that just yesterday the place had been swarming with monsters. Now, it was completely empty. Glancing at Connor, she guessed that the devils he had summoned yesterday must have wiped them all out. Connor stood there looking stunned and awkward. The idea of being in a two-person party with Mary made him feel uneasy. Glancing at her, he admitted to himself that things were even more uncomfortable now, especially after his overreaction to the leaked video. When Mary turned and looked at him with hopeful eyes, he mentally sighed. How could he say no to her when she looked at him like that? Koma, appearing cheerful, commented that his master was right. Whispering in Connor's ear, he added slyly that he had made a good call with this one. Brushing Koma off his shoulder, Connor noted how quiet he had been lately. And now, he was acting all mischievous. Koma shouted that Connor only ever fumbled when it came to women. Crossing his arms with pride, Koma explained that he was in a good mood because he had just gained his first skill. Connor, pointing at him, admitted that he had forgotten. Becoming stronger didn't just affect him, it also affected Koma. Mary came running over, surprised, and asked if Pat, meaning Koma, had really received a skill. She mentioned that she thought only high-level pets could do that. Koma barked back, demanding they stop calling him a pet. Mary was startled by his reaction. But Koma, arms folded, proudly declared he was the great spirit of the forest, bound by contract to Connor. Squatting in front of him, Mary explained that since Koma called Connor master, she had assumed he was just a pet. Koma dryly replied that such misunderstandings were merely business complexities. Connor looked at her silently, trying to read her expression. She simply smiled. Standing beside her, Connor asked why she was so kind to him. He looked into her eyes and wondered aloud. Was it because he was useful in combat? Mary replied with a grin, saying that was one reason, but the main one was that he was handsome. Taken aback and blushing, Connor asked again, uncertain if she was serious. Mary laughed and said it was a joke. She just liked teasing him. Koma sat on a stone nearby, watching them with an amused expression. Mary explained that at first, she'd approached him because she thought he'd be helpful in a hunt. But now, her motivation had changed. Connor asked what that new reason was. Calmly, Mary said it was simple. She was curious about him, not the in-game character or master, but the gamer behind it all. Connor imagined himself standing back-to-back with his real-world self. A sharp reminder of the line between game and reality. Looking down, he muttered that he wasn't such an impressive player. Mary disagreed, saying that to her, he was a good person. She emphasized that it had only taken one hunt to see how reliable he truly was. She remembered the way he stood among the team, not only using his support skills effectively, but also protecting and guiding his allies. As Connor inspected his weapon, Mary added that he was the one who helped them make the best use of their equipment and told them how to position themselves. She'd never met anyone like that. Embarrassed, Connor guessed it was probably because he used to be a guildmaster. Crossing her legs, Mary said that's exactly why she found him so intriguing. She genuinely wanted to understand the kind of person he was. With a quiet exhale, Connor responded that he understood, but still believed he wasn't worth that kind of attention. He stood alone amid the ruins, lost in thought. Without warning, the ground beneath Connor gave way. Shocked, he blurted out, trying to understand what was happening. Mary cried out in alarm, clearly frightened for him. System messages flashed. He was stunned and had 5 seconds until he would regain consciousness. The countdown ticked down to 0. Connor's eyes suddenly snapped open. Getting to his feet, he asked aloud if the ground had really just collapsed beneath them. He turned upon hearing Mary's voice. She and Coma hurried over, and Connor immediately noticed Mary's shoulder was injured. She glanced at the wound and brushed it off, insisting it wasn't serious. With a satisfied look, Coma explained that Mary had shielded Connor from a falling stone during the collapse. Jumping onto Connor's arm, Coma watched as Connor apologized. Mary reassured him. It was a minor injury and she had already taken a potion, so she would heal quickly. Suddenly, all three of them turned toward a noise. They saw the small bodies of dead lizards lying around. The narration revealed they had stumbled into a hidden dungeon beneath the Sohag ruins, once a secret lab of the cult Osric. Mary looked around warily, noting how suspicious everything seemed. Examining the wires and fallen creatures, she speculated this dungeon might be related to the unusually large number of monsters they had encountered during the recent hunt. Her tone serious, she pointed out that there was no record of a hidden area like this beneath Sohag. Connor grinned and asked if they'd found a secret dungeon. He imagined a goblin from earlier, recalling that such hidden places usually held rare monsters or special quests, like the Goblin Lord. Connor's mood brightened. Special dungeons meant special rewards. Suddenly, he pointed. A figure was there. A man emerged from the lab staggering. He collapsed to the ground. Connor and Mary exchanged a glance. They quickly poured a potion into the man's mouth. As he sat atop a tangle of wires, the man thanked them, saying their help had saved him. Connor asked him to explain what this place was. Producing a badge, the man introduced himself as a member of a secret group called the Guardians. He and his team had come to the Sohag ruins after learning that a dark religious cult, Osric, was operating here. He remembered how one of Osric's cultists had manipulated mana with ease, explaining that the enemy was far stronger than expected, and he'd barely escaped. Pleading, he asked them to stop the cult's plan. Connor, now serious, asked what exactly they needed to do. The man explained that deep in the lab were 5 orbs powering a device. If not destroyed, they would bring forth an unspeakable evil. Suddenly, enemy warriors began rushing toward them. Connor grabbed his weapon, telling Mary to stay behind and protect the injured man. Hoisting a club over his shoulder, he declared that Mary had been hurt because of him. And now, it was his responsibility to make things right. As they moved on, Connor turned to Mary and asked her to promise she wouldn't post any videos or screenshots of him online. As enemies rushed at them, he also asked her to keep everything she was about to witness a secret. He suddenly spun around, ready to fight. Connor unleashed a rapid assault on the incoming warriors, his eyes glowing as he declared that he would destroy everything and everyone in the dungeon. A system message appeared. It was a hidden quest. Disrupt a conspiracy by destroying the energy spheres in Osric's laboratory. One of the cultists was suddenly hurled into a wall. Slumped on the floor, he muttered that he wasn't a guardian but merely an adventurer. When asked where the lab was, he said the protagonist didn't need to know. Connor crouched in front of him and offered to spare his life if he cooperated. But the man laughed, declaring that cultists don't beg for mercy. Grinning maniacally, the cultist called Connor a foolish heretic and warned that he'd regret stepping into this place just to access the lab. Leaning on his weapon, Connor acknowledged the man's loyalty, admitting he wouldn't talk no matter what. The cultist agreed, saying even torture wouldn't change his mind. Gripping his weapon, Connor asked who said anything about torture. It was too cruel. He simply wanted to blow off steam. The cultist stared in disbelief as Connor added that he hadn't fought in a while and his body was craving action. Flashing a wide smile, Connor said he truly hoped the man's loyalty wouldn't falter. With eyes blazing, Connor admitted he just wanted to break something. Resigned, the cultist pointed toward the corridor. If they went straight, then turned right, they'd find the research lab. Connor smacked him lightly on the head, calling him a little bastard. Standing before him, Connor declared that now they knew the lab's location. It was time to move. Mary, surprised, turned to him and asked why he had hidden his power all this time. Looking into her eyes, Connor told her he'd explain everything after the mission was over. Mary sighed and said she could wait. As they walked through the corridor, she asked him to promise he'd really tell her. He nodded in agreement. Connor looked off to the side, deep in thought. They passed a shattered glass flask on the ground. Several bodies were strewn across the floor, lifeless. They had entered the depths of the Sohag ruins, the hidden research lab of the cult of Osric. Examining some documents, a man murmured that he couldn't use them. Turning around, Romulus growled that the Guardians had always meddled in their work. One of the Guardians, furious, shouted back that their mission was to protect the world. They wouldn't stand by while Osric's evil plans unfolded. With dread in his voice and eyes locked forward, he affirmed, "They will stop them." Without warning, the man struck him. As Romulus turned to leave, he ordered the others to clean up the mess, and they obeyed. Glancing at one of his men, Romulus asked about the Guardian who had escaped. He was informed the Guardian was wounded and being chased. He likely hadn't gotten far. The priest raised his head, his mind filled with scorn. The Guardians, so full of righteous fury, had tried to stop them, and failed miserably. His gaze settled on a massive egg. With a sneer, he muttered that they should watch from the afterlife as their ruler was reborn. Suddenly, a brilliant light burst into the room. A deafening explosion followed, shaking the chamber. Shocked, the priest looked up and cried out in panic, "What? No!" He spun around, startled by a voice demanding what had just happened. With a hand on his face, the protagonist smirked, calling it a perfect surprise attack. Staring at them, the priest demanded to know who they were. They replied that they were Guardians, prompting the hero to sarcastically question why everyone kept assuming he was one. The priest, now facing them, heard someone call him a saboteur and a bastard. He muttered in disbelief, wondering if they had really eliminated all the forces outside. Romulus instructed his followers to speed things up. Now that intruders had breached the lab, the resurrection ritual had to begin immediately. He yanked down a lever. Instantly, electricity surged through the wires. Lightning arced through the air around them. A system message appeared. The resurrection ritual had begun. To stop the boss monster from reviving, all 5 energy spheres had to be destroyed within 5 minutes. The countdown began. 4 minutes and 59 seconds remaining. Time was ticking. Looking ahead, Mary exclaimed that this was a timed quest. The protagonist told her to focus on the remaining spheres. He'd handle the rest. With a confident grin, he assured her he could do it alone, saying only a few spheres remained anyway. Meanwhile, Romulus raised his weapon. The protagonist noted that the priest might become a bit of a nuisance. But charging forward, he accepted the task. He'd take out the spheres. Stretching his hand toward them, Romulus shouted that this insolent heretic must be punished. A sword swung at the protagonist. He reacted swiftly, parrying the blow with precision. Dodging again, he struck back with a sharp elbow, cursing under his breath. His opponent's eyes widened in shock, but the priest retaliated with a heavy swing. The hero shouted for him to get out of his way. Suddenly, a shout came from behind. The protagonist stopped his next attack, just as a green projectile hurtled toward him. It exploded on impact. One of the masked enemies had grabbed the protagonist by the neck. The hero, irritated, asked if it made any sense to use an area of effect attack while allies were still in the area. Wasn't that overkill? Raising his hand, Romulus demanded an explanation from the one who had used another man as a shield. Facing the protagonist, the priest admitted that he was indeed strong. His instincts in battle and situational awareness were exceptional. Handling someone like him alone would be no easy task. The hero narrowed his eyes and asked if that meant there were no fighters left on their side. Was Romulus planning to surrender? Romulus responded only with a sly grin. The hero's eyes widened. Was he wrong to assume Romulus was alone? Suddenly, the protagonist made a sharp motion with his hand. Connor, watching nearby, turned to see what was happening. As he observed the spirit forming, he muttered in disbelief. It was a ghost. Standing apart from the hero, Romulus introduced himself as the high priest of the great cult of Osric, a dark priest. Spirits began to rise from the corpses around them. Romulus declared that the souls of the dead were the source of his power. A ghost emerged from a fallen body. Romulus added that as long as there were corpses nearby, he would remain invincible. Lifting his hand, he turned toward the hero once more. Looking directly at him, Romulus proclaimed that the hero too would soon die and fuel his power. The system revealed his stats. High Priest of the Cult of Osric, level 55, human class. Dark Priest. Special skill, Shadow of the Dead. Grinning skulls floated ominously above the hero. Connor sprinted as fast as he could. The spirits lunged toward his body. He stopped abruptly, planting his foot firmly. With a swift motion, he slashed the air above him. The spirit recoiled, retreating in fear. The hero shut his eyes, bracing himself. The spirits began passing straight through his body like a deadly whirlwind. Each time they touched him, his strength dropped. It was a debilitating summoned effect. Physical attacks were useless. If this dragged on, he would lose. He had to end it fast. Only 3 minutes remained. Could this be Romulus's real goal? To stall for time? The hero stared at him, realization dawning. Romulus laughed mockingly, saying the hero was a fool. His ghost couldn't be beaten by mere brute force. A voice questioned if the explosion earlier was part of the plan. The hero clenched his weapon and decided, if the ghosts couldn't be touched, then he'd strike the summoner directly. He delivered a crushing blow. He charged Romulus with a fierce battle cry. After deflecting it, the hero grinned and taunted. If he blocked it once, maybe next time he'd do it with his face. Enraged, Romulus roared that the hero was a cursed heretic. He vowed to kill him. A dense, swirling aura of spirits surrounded the protagonist. Romulus manipulated the spiritual vortex with practiced control. Romulus shouted for the winds to intensify and declared confidently that the hero could neither defeat him nor stop the resurrection. Just then, a system message appeared. The hero had reached level. A new skill became available, Flying Arrow. This ability allowed him to hurl a weapon at a target with devastating force. A brilliant flash burst through the air as Romulus stretched out his hand. In stunned disbelief, Romulus asked what that was. With a smirk, the hero replied, "It's divine punishment, bastard." Romulus's eyes blazed with fury. The flying arrow struck him dead on. Blood burst from his mouth as the impact hit his chest. A radiant flash lit up the entire area. Romulus collapsed, slumped over with his head bowed. The arrow protruded from the center of his chest. The hero remarked that controlling the new skill had been easier than expected. If he had known it was this simple, he would have used it earlier. He added calmly that now, only one task remained. Raising his head, he confirmed that another sphere had been destroyed. The arrow had curved around Romulus and struck its target. Another explosion erupted. The hero quickly processed the outcome in his mind. It had worked. He had aimed upward, and now only 2 spheres remained. Meanwhile, Mary winced and thought she just had to hold on a bit longer. Behind her, a man shouted in frustration, demanding she stop interfering. He yelled that she should stay out of their sacred ritual. The girl gasped in fear. He seized her injured shoulder, causing her to cry out in pain. Gritting her teeth, Mary reminded herself how little time remained. Just 1 minute and 20 seconds. Another flying arrow whistled through the air. A brilliant burst of energy ignited in front of them. A man screamed out that the spheres must be protected, but the protagonist charged and knocked him down before he could act. Mark called out to the hero, who responded with a sigh. Noting that Mary looked to be in serious pain and aiming must have been hard with her injured shoulder. Mary looked down, apologizing, saying she felt like a burden. The hero reassured her. There was no need to apologize. What mattered now was destroying the last sphere. She looked up, asking for confirmation. He nodded, explaining that the flying arrow skill was recharging. It required 3 minutes before it could be used again. A voice echoed, reminding them that normal attacks wouldn't work on the spheres. Only her magic could do it. Mary looked anxious, biting her lip. Connor encouraged her, saying that if it were up to him, he'd still try regardless of the odds. Time would keep moving either way. Mary nodded and said she would give it her best. She raised her weapon and asked them not to be too harsh if she missed. The countdown showed 15 seconds. Flames started to gather at the tip of her weapon. With 13 seconds left, she trembled. At 10 seconds, she whispered a plea. At 6 seconds, the hero gently took her hands. Mary's eyes widened in surprise. With 5 seconds remaining, the hero locked eyes with her. Mary looked into his gaze. 4 seconds. A faint smile appeared on her lips. As they both shouted with determination, they raised their weapons. 3 seconds. 2. A blinding flash ignited near the final sphere. Just 1 second left. Romulus screamed in terror. No! The flash struck the sphere and exploded. The voice echoed once more, identifying the man as Romulus. The crowd stared in shock. The dying Romulus bellowed that he would bring forth something. He opened his mouth wide and declared it would be a catastrophe. The time limit had run out. The hero had failed to stop the boss monster's resurrection or destroy all the spheres. The display ominously warned, "Get ready, the boss monster will awaken soon." Cracks began forming on the last remaining sphere. Bright flashes of energy burst from within. Connor closed his eyes in frustration, muttering that this monster was like an undead, something that needed to be finished for good. Mary, stunned, asked the hero what was happening. The hero's eyes widened in fear as he looked up. From the cracked sphere emerged a monstrous snake. A hidden quest appeared. Eliminate the disaster. Objective: defeat the reanimated lightning python. Progress: 0%. Lightning coiled and sparked across the snake's massive body. The hero grimaced. So this was the disaster the cult kept mentioning. They had meant this python all along. Fixing his eyes on the beast, he noted that its size was smaller than he had imagined. According to ancient legends, the monster was said to be large enough to coil around a mountain. But this creature was only about 20 meters long. The python opened its massive mouth, hissing with lethal energy. A system message described it. Lightning Python, resurrected by cult experiments. A being from another world that destroyed the city of Soho in a single night. Level species, unknown, boss rank. Class, lightning destroyer. Special ability, charge strike. The hero thought to himself, so it's only level. Mary, staring in awe, suggested they might have failed to fully resurrect it because of the destroyed spheres, but even so, it was still a level 70 boss. They had to run. The protagonist smirked at the idea. So, we're not going to fight it? He teased. Connor, determined, said he couldn't walk away from such a rare opportunity. He'd handle it. Mary should escape first. The hero looked at her, clearly surprised. Mary handed him a small flask, explaining it was a potion for resisting elemental attacks. It wasn't particularly strong, but better than nothing. He looked at the potion skeptically, but Mary insisted. After coming this far, they couldn't miss the chance to face something this rare. Smiling, Mary said confidently that she'd protect him. Looking into her eyes, the hero heard her promise that they'd fight together until the very end. He nodded. He was ready. The monster's eyes glowed ominously. Someone muttered, "But what if we die here?" Without turning, the hero responded that he wouldn't take responsibility for that. An explosion rocked the battlefield, and the hero dashed away from the blast. Connor crouched low, gripping the potion tightly. The hero noted that despite the python's size, it moved with surprising speed. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. A new message confirmed his resistance to elemental attacks had increased to... Suddenly, the python lunged. It slammed into a wall, and the hero muttered, "All right then." Connor abruptly launched an attack, swinging his weapon at the beast. The protagonist grinned, watching. Now they'd see how the monster handled a real hit. Charging at the python, he activated Mortality, a skill that weakened the enemy's defense and magical resistance. His mace began to glow, signaling a devastating strike. He followed up with Triple Blow, landing 3 powerful hits in rapid succession. The python surged with lightning arcs bursting from its body. The hero leapt back, yelling in warning. Then, suddenly, he spun around. Something had caught his attention. The protagonist stared at the monster. It was evident the python was charging up its breath attack. Out of nowhere, the girl launched a surprise attack from the side. Her fiery strike collided with the beast. The hero agilely evaded a beam of energy aimed at him. The monster retaliated with an upward assault. Knocked down, the hero hit the ground as the girl rushed to check on him. Clutching his head, Connor confirmed he was okay, just barely. Mary noted that he actually sounded like he was in pain, and he awkwardly joked that she should pretend she didn't hear that. Covering one eye, the protagonist inwardly admitted it truly hurt. Standing among cracks in the ground, he reflected that no matter how weakened he might feel, a hidden boss was still a hidden boss. Its area attack was catastrophic in scale. Glancing away, he heard Mary warn that if the creature attacked like that again, the whole lab might collapse. She suggested ending it quickly before it became stronger. The hero agreed. But lightning crackled around the python, and the hero remarked that it didn't seem like it was planning to wait. The system displayed that the python had activated a charge barrier, boosting its magic resistance by... The python hissed, sticking out its tongue. The warning said that contact with the barrier would result in electric shock and paralysis. It launched another attack, and the hero thought to himself that the creature was sinking energy into both its charge breath and its protective barrier. As the barrier shimmered stronger, he realized this relentless pattern would repeat until it recovered fully. Mary asked what their options were. Magic was useless, and physical attacks would risk paralysis. Raising his hand, the hero assured her that not all hope was lost. Extending his hand forward, Connor declared that it was time to use debuffs. The description explained that exhaustion would gradually drain the enemy's health and mana. A green glow surrounded the python as it looked ahead in startled confusion. Suddenly, it reared back in agony. The pain had driven it into a frenzy, and the barrier shattered. Seeing the moment, the girl confirmed the barrier was down. The hero noted that even with high magic resistance, fixed damage still applied, didn't it? Smirking, he surmised that the barrier's forced removal probably interrupted the python's ability to gather mana. Stats appeared on screen showing the python had lost a significant chunk of health. Charging forward, the protagonist thought this would be enough to finish it. He dashed past the python, preparing for the final phase. But then, the monster retaliated with a sudden burst, a sphere of lightning. The hero glanced sideways and instinctively deflected the incoming attack. Connor narrowed his eyes and turned his head. He extended his arm and activated speed control, slowing the python's movement, attacks, and spellcasting. As he launched his next strike, he taunted the creature, saying he wouldn't fall for the same trick again. This python was nothing if not stubborn. Suddenly, a purple streak flashed across the hero's eye. Scales began to form on his body. His eyes glowed a brilliant blue. A new trait was displayed: Contempt for the Strong, increasing damage dealt to higher-level enemies and reducing incoming damage. A radiant blue beam flared up behind the hero. A grin spread across his face as a system message confirmed. The cult's plot had been successfully disrupted. The quest was complete. The python lay motionless on the ground, finally defeated. Another notification confirmed the quest's success, prompting the hero to collect his rewards from the python's remains. His level increased. He reached level still. He found it disappointing, having expected to gain at least 2 levels. How long would it take to reach level 200 at this pace? Despite the underwhelming level gain, he thought the reward itself was more than fair. Just then, Mary rushed over, calling out to him. Breathless, she said she couldn't believe it. He actually killed the boss. He humbly credited her help, saying she worked hard too. But Mary frowned, not convinced. She thought to herself that he was lying. He probably could have done it all on his own. Gazing at the fallen monster, she considered that even with the debuffs applied, it would normally take a team of 5 players over level 70 to take down a boss like this. Meanwhile, Connor, still only level 45, had managed to do it solo. She was quietly amazed. He called her out of her thoughts, and she quickly apologized. She suggested they check the rewards quickly, but Connor refused. He turned to her seriously, saying there was a more pressing matter. Nervously, Mary guessed he might be hiding something, but he simply asked if she had any rubber gloves. She smiled at the unexpected question. He explained that, judging by the situation, they'd need to cut the python open to retrieve the reward. Mary agreed. It really was an important question. The loot was gathered: python scales, python blood, python meat, and python bones. They also obtained a mysterious python item. Even after taking only the best materials, there was still an overwhelming amount. Mary concluded that big bosses definitely made the grind worthwhile. As Connor crouched beside the remains, he noted the only issue was how oversized everything was. Mary guessed he wasn't too thrilled about the rewards. The hero reflected briefly. He had even run an analysis. Yet in the end, most of the loot was just material. Even for a hidden dungeon boss, it was underwhelming. But then, he noticed the one truly valuable prize: the Python Core, an energy-rich item saturated with light attribute power. He realized that, with this, maybe he wouldn't need to work so hard anymore. Still, he sighed inwardly. There was only one core. He couldn't split it. Mary glanced at him, sensing something. Approaching her, Connor admitted he felt a bit awkward, but he acknowledged that she had helped. Honestly, though, he felt he'd done more. Even so, he said he couldn't, in good conscience, keep all the rewards for himself. He picked up the glowing core, then added with a smile that he'd just take this one insignificant python core and let her have the rest. Their eyes met in a silent exchange. Then, Mary burst into laughter, and Connor turned away, blushing from the attention. The hero, confused, asked why she was laughing like that. It was eerie. Mary chuckled and said the more she watched him, the more interesting he became. She added that he didn't need to be so considerate. He should just take all the rewards. The hero blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. With a sly smile, Mary reminded him of how they used to go hunting, how she would gather crystals and hand them over to him. She told him to think of it like that again and not to worry. As the hero soared past glowing beams, Mary continued, saying that just doing this quest together was reward enough. It was the most exciting mission she'd ever been part of. Staring ahead with a rare seriousness, she admitted she'd probably never forget this adventure. The hero looked at her, puzzled by what she found so captivating. Still, he eventually gave in, saying if she insisted, he wouldn't argue. He raised his eyebrows, a little stunned. This wasn't the outcome he expected. Not that he minded, but folding his arms, he realized there was a problem. There was simply too much loot to fit into his inventory. As he looked away, he caught Mary silently thinking they should probably split it evenly. Just then, Koma the hamster raised his tiny paw, declaring that it was finally time for his moment to shine. The hero eyed the little creature, suspicious. Was he trying to sneak off with the leftovers? Koma scoffed, calling the hero a clueless owner who still didn't understand just how amazing he was. With dramatic flair, Koma raised his paws high. A shimmering portal suddenly burst open before them. Lowering his hands, Koma shouted triumphantly. The hero blinked wide-eyed in surprise. Koma asked smugly if he saw that, to which the hero simply nodded. He was watching. Koma extended his paw to the side. He announced that this was his new magic. Pulling a bag from behind his back, he introduced it. The Endless Bag. But then Koma's expression shifted. He looked down at it with sudden unease. Holding the strange item, the hero skeptically asked if this rag was supposed to be the new skill. Koma snapped at him to drop it, calling him an idiot. Peering inside the swirling space within the cloth, the hero asked what exactly it was. Koma gripped the cloth tightly, not letting go. A system message explained. The Endless Bag was a magical artifact created with Koma's ability. Born from the spiritual world, it represented the emptiness of nothingness, and as such, had infinite storage capacity. Koma could wrap it around himself and store as many items as needed. Amazed, the hero asked aloud, "Infinite capacity?" Inventory limits plagued most players, but this would solve that problem completely. Cradling the smug hamster, the hero called him a little rascal. He was finally earning his keep. Koma proudly claimed he was always ready when it came to striking gold. The hero asked if he wanted a treat to celebrate. Today, the hero took a step forward, and a mysterious man appeared behind him, asking with a steady voice if he had really defeated the monster. Both the hero and Mary turned toward the voice, fear flickering in their eyes. The hero stared at the man, stunned. He hadn't sensed him at all. He asked who he was. Grinning, the man clarified that he shouldn't be misunderstood. He wasn't their enemy. Still wide-eyed, the protagonist responded that it seemed like he was. The man gave a sly smile, eyes locked on the hero with unreadable intent. The man turned his gaze aside with a sly grin, acknowledging that he was the injured guard. Placing a hand on his face in mild embarrassment, he admitted he had hoped to make a dramatic entrance, but now it just felt awkward. Regaining composure, he looked forward and said that, in any case, he was genuinely glad to see Connor. The protagonist's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't sensed any danger or presence at all. The man met his gaze and confirmed, "Connor, wasn't it?" Suddenly, a bright flash filled the area. The hero raised his weapon and demanded to know who the stranger was. The man calmly said he would have figured it out already if he had used the Rune of Insight, then began introducing himself. Connor crouched defensively and repeated his question. Who was he? And how did he know his name? The man laughed, saying Connor was clearly someone who acted before thinking. Raising a hand, the man listened as Connor pointed out that even with the Rune of Insight, he couldn't read any of his data. Connor asked if he was aware of that. The hero jumped back, breathing heavily. Connor, still crouched, thought to himself that he had completely forgotten. If the level gap between users was too great, even the Rune of Insight couldn't reveal anything. The stranger was surprised that Connor knew this. So, why had someone as powerful as him approached so discreetly? Standing tall, Connor asked if his only goal was to show off his strength to a mere level 46 user. The man apologized. He often acted on impulse without thinking. Looking ahead, the man said there was no grand reason. He was simply curious. Connor asked, curious about a low-level player like him? With a knowing smile, the man replied that while Connor might be small in level, he wasn't just some ordinary user. Looking up, the hero was stunned to hear him say it outright. Connor, Vincent's only student? Introducing himself formally, the man, Chuck, said he would get to the point. He knew about Vincent's only disciple. Connor's eyes widened. How did he know? Chuck closed his eyes and reassured him. No need to worry. He was the only one aware of Vincent's identity. As he walked past, Chuck said that if Connor wanted to learn more, he should come to Sensodyne. He'd reach out soon. Without another word, he turned sharply and walked away. Before leaving, he looked toward Mary and said he regretted ruining the light-hearted mood. Mary said nothing, just staring silently. Chuck smirked once more. He raised his hand in farewell, and Connor silently watched him go. Clenching his fist, Connor thought to himself, his secret was out, and by someone clearly on a much higher level. He muttered aloud that this guy claimed to be the only one who knew about Master Vincent. But could he really trust that? What if others, like Genesis, also knew the truth? Staring into the distance, Connor introduced the blonde stranger to his own thoughts. It felt like something had just begun, even though this moment felt like an ending. Mary reached out and touched Connor's shoulder. She pulled him gently and said that she didn't know anything. Looking into his eyes, she added that even if she had heard something, it didn't matter. She didn't record anything, take screenshots, or share anything online. Smiling warmly, she reassured him. He had nothing to worry about. Thomas smiled warmly and reassured Connor that if anything happened, he would protect him. There was no need to be afraid. Connor stared at him in surprise, touched by the gesture. He instinctively covered his mouth, struggling to respond. Looking up at the ceiling, he quietly expressed his gratitude toward both Mary and Tama. He then recalled their journey and how, after leaving the hidden dungeon, the path he shared with Mary came to an end. He remembered her waving goodbye and saying she'd remain at the ruins for a while to focus on leveling up. Since then, Connor hadn't returned to the dam. He stared into the camera, reflecting on how things had changed. Resting his head on his hand, he admitted that even though Mary and Toma had tried to reassure him, he still felt uneasy. The fact that his identity had been exposed so easily bothered him. He sighed and muttered that he just meant to take a short nap. The sound of his phone ringing pulled him back. He noted it had already been 3 days since he entered the dam. A new notification arrived, an email from that guy. Under the moonlight in Gangnam, Connor made his way through the streets. Staring at his phone, he thought the sender must be crazy. Who arranges a meeting at a nightclub? Glancing at the bustling crowd, he admitted to himself that it had been a long time since he walked the streets at night like this. Normally, he'd be gaming while others partied. He stopped in front of a building. Looking up, he asked aloud, what was Heaven's Club? It was his first time at a place like this. He wondered if they'd let him in. But the bouncer held up a hand, stating Connor had violated the dress code. Holding up a finger, Connor thought that at least it wasn't his face that got him rejected. It was the sweatpants. He tried to reason with the guard, saying he wasn't there to party, just to meet someone briefly. The bouncer didn't budge. He didn't think that was going to work. A passerby scoffed at Connor's appearance, joking about wearing sweatpants to Heaven's Club. A girl told him to keep it down, worried he might be overheard. The guy responded with a middle finger, saying if he was heard, he'd show it directly. He told Connor to stop causing trouble and scram. Connor clenched his teeth in frustration. Suddenly, Chuck appeared and put an arm around him, casually noting that Connor had already arrived. Turning to him, Chuck suggested that he should dress better next time. Realizing who Connor was with, the guard bowed and frantically apologized. Chuck shrugged it off. It was Connor's first club visit, but the guard had still been a bit rude. He joked that if he were on duty, he might have kicked him out too. Connor muttered that Chuck basically told him to listen to the guard. A girl nearby looked at Connor in admiration, commenting on how cool he was, while a guy scoffed, saying this loser couldn't possibly be new Chuck's friend. Chuck glanced back at the murmuring crowd. His expression darkened. He muttered that they'd messed up and wouldn't be allowed near the scene again. All their equipment was already inside the club. Inside, people danced to the music. The guard stood firmly outside the VIP room. Chuck casually reached for some drinks and asked Connor whether he preferred Dom Perignon or Armand de Brignac. Chuck smiled and said if Connor wasn't into champagne, he could get him something else. Connor replied bluntly that he didn't even know what champagne was. He wasn't there to drink. Chuck spun around in mock surprise and joked that if Connor wanted to dance, he shouldn't be shy. Connor, irritated, shouted that Chuck was obviously trying to provoke him. He was the one who invited him here in the first place. Chuck began pouring a drink and admitted that Connor's reactions were too entertaining to resist, so he poked fun on purpose. Connor, growing more impatient, told him to cut it out and explain who he really was. Chuck grew serious, locking eyes with him. He said he owed Connor an apology, not just for his behavior, but for ruining his last encounter. He asked for a chance to explain. Looking into his drink, Chuck recalled the person he had impersonated. He said the man was real, a fellow guardian who had escaped a research lab in Austria and died not long after. Connor questioned if Chuck had really used the face of a dead comrade just to deceive him. Chuck admitted that it was true and said there was no excuse. Doing that was a betrayal of the guardian's values. Taking his glass, Chuck said, "Despite that, it had been worth it." He apologized to his comrades but didn't regret his decision. He revealed that he wasn't just anyone. He was Vincent's only student. Taking a slow sip, Chuck confirmed it again. He was indeed that student. But more importantly, his real purpose had been to assess the power of hidden classes like Connor's. He'd already known Connor possessed one. Shocked, Connor slammed the drink back into the glass and shouted in disbelief. Chuck calmly responded. He too was part of a hidden class. As Chuck continued, Connor thought to himself that while he'd suspected Chuck wasn't an ordinary player, hearing it confirmed still amazed him. Another hidden class, just like his. Chuck smirked, saying he knew this already. But he warned that hidden classes weren't all-powerful. Connor muttered that his confidence was somehow irritating. With arms crossed, Chuck reassured him his information was safe. As he said before, even in the real world, no one knew about him. Not even the people from Genesis, whom Connor feared, knew he was Vincent's student. Connor snapped back, insisting that he wasn't afraid of them. Throwing his hands up, he questioned what a hidden class even meant anymore. Wasn't Chuck the one claiming to know everything about him? Chuck replied that he couldn't reveal it all. Connor was still too weak to understand. Chuck reached for his drink and told him simply, "Get stronger." Turning away, he added that only then could he tell him everything. Connor had to live up to the name of Vincent's student. Connor looked at him steadily. Chuck took another sip and cheerfully asked if he was ready to dance now that they were done talking. Connor shouted no, clearly annoyed. Meanwhile, Toma greeted the market's owner with a grin. As Connor walked through the market, he asked if anything had gone wrong in his absence. Comer responded dryly that he wasn't as troublesome as Connor himself. Lying down on a scarf, Comer asked if Connor was all right. Had he sorted things out in the other world? Connor hesitated and said he wasn't sure. His thoughts turned back to Chuck. The whole exchange had left him unsettled. He realized the conversation ended without any real clarity. What did Chuck want? Surely it wasn't just to build connections between hidden classes. Nearby, Toma was cracking a nut and casually asked, so why had Connor really come back here? Connor stared ahead, thinking how out of place he felt in such a dark, sleazy area. It didn't suit someone like him. The man next to him looked directly at him and asked if he was getting irritated. Connor replied coolly that this wasn't the time or place to discuss such things. Still, Connor couldn't help but reflect on the surroundings. This area was notorious for its nightlife, bars, gambling dens, and other adult entertainment venues. It was famous for letting players indulge in all sorts of virtual pleasures. But he reminded himself he was only here for the underground market. Scanning the street, he reaffirmed his plan. Sell the loot, upgrade his gear, and move on to the next region. No need to linger here. His eyes snapped open. He noticed someone approaching. He examined the stranger's clothing closely. When the man joined another group, Connor asked quietly if they were members of Genesis. With irritation rising, Connor shut his eyes. Even here, in a place like this, the members of that prestigious guild were acting out and making trouble. Rage built up in him. He wanted nothing more than to crush them right there. But he forced himself to calm down, gritting his teeth. It didn't matter, yet. Arms folded, Connor questioned if he was backing off because he was afraid. He answered himself. It wasn't fear, it was disgust. He wasn't avoiding them out of fear, but because they were filth. He walked past the group and muttered that there would be a time to crush them. But not now. Right now, they had to sell everything and leave. Just then, one of the Genesis members leaned in and asked if the rumors were true. Did Connor have something valuable? The man stayed silent. The Genesis guy got irritated and demanded a response. accusing him of being deaf. Another Genesis member placed a hand on the man's shoulder, suspicious. Despite several checks, something seemed off. The man gave off an unusually powerful presence. Turning, he remarked that this was why their leader always beat him down. So what if the old man was a higher level? With a smug grin, he reminded them all, they were Genesis. Getting involved with them meant starting a war. He scanned the nearby crowd and sneered. No one would stop them. No one dared to. That's how powerful Genesis was. He tapped his chest and smiled mockingly at Connor, accusing him of being too scared to speak. In response, Connor punched him in the face, sending him flying into a wall. As the guy opened his mouth in pain, Connor muttered that he was sick of hearing him talk. Then he shouted at him. "Who's scared now?" The guy screamed back, pointing to his uniform. Didn't Connor see? They were from Genesis. Connor punched him again, yelling that this was exactly why he despised them. Placing his hands on his hips, he scoffed that they were nothing without their guild behind them, just noise and arrogance. Nearby, Koma observed that Connor clearly couldn't hold back anymore. Connor clenched his jaw, saying he could have held back if someone hadn't been chatting beside him. Koma replied he was just voicing his thoughts. Turning away, Connor said not to worry. People like that always behave that way. One of the men stood in silence, and Connor began to wonder, could he really not speak at all? As Connor turned around, someone questioned how he planned to handle the consequences, given that his guild wasn't even that influential. Connor calmly responded that it didn't matter. It wasn't the kind of PvP that got recorded. And after getting beaten, those guys likely wouldn't dare speak up. He clenched his jaw and added that they should just focus on leaving. Once they sold off their loot, they'd be done. One of the men quietly tipped his hat. The exterior of the intervention hotel glowed softly under the lanterns. As Connor pushed open the door, he immediately noticed a posted notice. Standing on the spacious platform, Connor took it all in, while Cumber commented on how roomy the place was. Koma added that from outside it seemed much smaller. It was actually a specialized facility for adventurers, both for rest and training. Pricey, yes, but worth every coin. Connor smiled, agreeing. But before he could respond, Koma smugly declared he didn't need to say it. He already knew. Koma then summoned a radiant golden sphere. Closing his eyes, he followed that by materializing a bottomless storage sack. As Connor observed the items, he asked whether all that flashy summoning was really necessary. Toma insisted that one shouldn't underestimate the drama of a glowing entrance. It had its charm. He then handed Connor a mace, commenting that a one-handed blunt weapon suited his fighting style better. Connor explained he had chosen another weapon earlier, only because it was cheap and easy to use, not because it was ideal. He stared at a system notification. It was finally time to select his primary weapon. He laid out several weapon emblems, thinking about his class. The Debuff Master. It gave access to 5 weapon types, including blunt weapons. Though he was most familiar with those, he decided it would be wise to try other styles. Turning slightly, Connor summoned a Shadow Boxer. A punching bag appeared before him, ready for testing. Strapping on a shield, he wondered aloud if it would be best to start with this one. Then, he struck the bag with force. Without pause, he landed a second and then a third powerful blow. Stepping back, Connor assessed the results. While the damage per hit was solid, the overall DPS was disappointingly low. A system message popped up again, drawing his attention. He grabbed a two-handed sword and decided to give it a try next. With a swift motion, he swung the blade. After what seemed like endless testing, Toma finally spoke up, asking how much longer Connor was going to keep this up. It had already been 2 hours. Exhausted, Connor stood silently in the center of the training field. He let out a breath and admitted to himself that things still felt unclear. Each weapon had its strengths and weaknesses, but none felt definitively right. In the end, he leaned toward the familiar and dependable choice, a one-handed blunt weapon. Suddenly, a voice cut through. Someone commented that all of this was meaningless. Connor turned, recognizing the speaker. Wasn't this the old man they'd seen earlier? The man stared at him silently. Chuck scratched the back of his head, and Connor thought, more importantly, how had this guy even gotten in? This was a sealed training space. Could Chuck have let him in? It had to be him again. Connor asked sharply, who was he? Was he one of the guards? Or had that annoying guy sent him? The man simply asked why Connor had helped him earlier, without asking for anything in return. Confused, Connor asked what he was talking about. The man suddenly shouted, demanding a clear answer from Connor. Connor froze for a moment, then finally spoke. His actions weren't driven by pity. He recalled a time when he was down on one knee feeling powerless. Seeing the old man unable to resist stronger people had reminded him too much of that. He admitted aloud that he simply no longer wanted to keep running from that part of his past. The man adjusted his hat and responded that it was a brief but valid reason. Then, removing his hat, he declared that from this moment on, he would help Connor grow stronger. Connor realized who the man truly was. Ben, a member of the elite 5 Heavenly Stars, like Beetlejuice. He was a martial artist of legendary caliber. Connor imagined Ben surrounded by weapons. With the ability to wield 18 weapon types proficiently, Ben had rightfully earned the title of Weapons Master. Looking at the hat, Connor realized it must have been enchanted. It had likely blocked Connor's insight skill from detecting Ben's true identity. Gritting his teeth, Connor admitted it was surprising to attract the attention of 2 top-tier figures like Beetlejuice and Ben. Still, he had to refuse. As Connor began to decline, saying Ben cut him off, guessing he must have a master already. A talent like his wouldn't go unnoticed. Ben raised his hand and clarified that training didn't have to follow the strict master-disciple model. He had noticed Connor struggling with his main weapon and simply wanted to help. With a calm voice, Ben added that he wasn't asking to become his teacher. Just think of him as a senior passing by, willing to offer advice to a younger one. Connor began to sweat. Ben's persuasion was intense, and honestly, he had a point. If he'd asked his master about the weapon issue, he then recalled Vincent, who'd said his body itself was the ultimate weapon, so using tools was for the weak. Clearly, that wasn't much help. Turning to Ben, Connor asked sincerely, how could he resolve his dilemma about choosing a main weapon? What suited him best? Ben replied, it's not about a single weapon. Reaching into his pocket, Ben posed a rhetorical question. Did Connor truly believe someone like him would ever be satisfied using just one type of weapon? Connor's eyes widened. Ben revealed a special belt and explained that with it, Connor would be able to train and master any weapon to the same level as his main one. Immediately, a system notification appeared, confirming the new ability. Connor then reviewed his emblems, explaining that equipment in this world was ranked in 8 tiers. The existence of the highest one, World, hadn't yet been confirmed. He then presented one of the rarest emblems and noted that among adventurers, the highest realistically obtainable rank was Mythical. Shocked, Connor asked if Ben was really giving him a mythical tier item, not just lending it. Ben replied that he needn't worry. Once equipped, the item would bind to him permanently. Lowering himself in humility, Connor reiterated that since he already had a master, he couldn't formally accept a new one. Kneeling down, he bowed respectfully to Ben as a gesture of deep respect toward a senior. Ben smiled, saying that though he had received many bows from students, this was the first time he had received one from a junior like this. Connor's expression was serious and focused. He then reached out his hand in gratitude. With conviction, he extended his hand again and declared that he accepted the offer. Ben chuckled, saying this reminded him of raising a puppy, watching someone grow with effort and time. Connor barked back, asking if he was joking. Ben calmly replied that trying to skip the process and jump straight to results would never work. Using a weapon and truly mastering it were worlds apart. Standing up, Connor clarified he had no intention of giving up. Ben, unfazed, simply told him to follow. Meanwhile, fierce duels unfolded between warriors in an underground fighting arena. The announcer proclaimed that the match was over. The crowd roared as the victorious fighter raised his arms. The winner was Miles the Deadly Mace. Connor arrived at the underground fight club and hesitantly asked if he was expected to take part. Ben explained that even though the fighters here weren't officially ranked, the arena still attracted plenty of skilled participants. It was a great place to learn about different fighting styles. Connor asked if that meant he was supposed to fight them directly. Handing over a paper, Ben confirmed it. This kind of sparring was more effective than training against monsters. It sharpened both technique and awareness. Connor examined the arena listings. Sure, real-time combat was great for improving skills, but he didn't see the point. The strongest opponent here was just barely above his level. He spotted the current champion, Level. Just then, someone handed him a mysterious bottle, saying it was a gift. Connor questioned what it was. The bottle opened. Something shot out and wrapped around his chest. Shocked, Connor yelled in confusion. He touched its core and wondered if it was armor. It looked too delicate. Ben replied with a smirk. saying that sometimes the more fragile something looks, the better it actually protects. Turning away, Ben added that her turn would come soon, so she should get ready. Oh, and no special skills or abilities allowed. Only basic combat techniques. Connor responded sarcastically, agreeing. But in return, if he beat the champion, he wanted a magical reward. Ben laughed, impressed by Connor's boldness. Smiling to himself, Connor thought Ben was seriously underestimating him, assuming a new weapon and restrictions would be enough to throw him off. He remembered fighting amidst fire, recalling how his past battles with Genesis and the intense training from his master had strengthened his foundational stats. This wasn't a real challenge. It felt more like recess. Another memory flashed, falling into deep water. Charging into the arena, Connor resolved to finish the trial quickly and claim his reward. The announcer took his place in the ring. With theatrical flair, he declared the arrival of a new fighter destined to make history in this sacred arena. Dramatically extending his hand, he announced the challenger's name, Weakling. A spotlight fell on Connor. Cringing, Connor thought this was beyond awkward. Not only was the name awful, but it felt like something straight out of the past. He had no doubt Ben was behind it. Sure enough, Ben smiled slyly from the stands. Connor raised an eyebrow as whispers spread. People looked at him like he was exactly what his name suggested. Pathetic. His opponent, the Mantis, eyed him and confidently stated he'd finish him with a single hit. Licking his lips, the Mantis added he might even take his time and draw out the pain. Connor smirked and asked if the Mantis knew who he was talking to. "You picked the wrong fight, pathetic Mantis." Enraged, the Mantis lunged forward, shouting that Connor would regret ever stepping into the arena. The protagonist parried the attack, distracted by a lingering question that had been on his mind for some time. The Mantis turned, curious, wondering aloud whether, if its insectoid head were smashed, the resulting blood would be red or another color. In response, the protagonist slashed with his sword. Connor clenched his jaw as the Mantis eyed him warily. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the protagonist. Connor collapsed, while the announcer dramatically proclaimed that the rookie had fallen victim to Mackey's blow in his very first match. In agony, the protagonist opened his mouth in confusion. This overwhelming pain couldn't have come from the Mantis's attack alone. His gaze fixed on the armor core, where he quickly scanned the latest system notification. The Mantis, perplexed but smug, stuck out its tongue and admitted it didn't understand the situation, but mocked how pathetic it looked. Now it was his turn to ask questions. Connor ground his teeth again. Mackey swung and taunted, wondering what color the protagonist's blood would be if he decapitated him. Narrowing his eyes, Mackey added that he might already know the answer. "Mackey? Swan?" the protagonist muttered through clenched teeth. He then sprang backward in a sharp motion. The Mantis sneered, commenting that while that dodge was lucky, the next attack might not be so easy to evade. Leaning on his sword, the protagonist muttered that things were chaotic enough. Maybe the Mantis should just shut up. He followed up with another sword strike. The Mantis blocked the attack. Then, unimpressed, he looked down and mocked the weakness of the blow, questioning what the protagonist hoped to accomplish. With that, the Mantis countered and landed a hit. Connor clenched his teeth again, feeling not just pain but an unusual sluggishness. Ordinarily, he would have dodged that strike. He stared at the Mantis, thinking to himself that there had to be more going on. This wasn't just a regular battle with some restriction. Then he opened his mouth to speak. He braced himself, shifting weight onto one leg. Gritting his teeth, he refocused, insisting they return to what truly mattered. From the sidelines, Ben stared into the ring, observing that the master's condition seemed unusually poor today. Palma agreed, saying the master could usually dodge such attacks effortlessly, even with his eyes shut. An old man then asked if Palma was worried about his comrade. Koma, turning away, denied it. In fact, he admitted wanting to see the master, usually so dominant, get humbled just once. Ben quietly observed that Koma seemed to carry a lot of repressed feelings. The old man looking down reflected that while this may be unpleasant for now, it was an invaluable lesson in weapon mastery. Fixing his eyes on the protagonist's sword, he noted that in battles where strength and skill were blocked, uncovering the true nature of one's weapon was what truly mattered. Smirking, he wondered how someone used to being the strongest would manage now that he was at a disadvantage. Ben's eyes widened. He watched in astonishment as the protagonist severed Mackey's hand. The Mantis began to tremble. Mackey clutched his severed arm, letting out a piercing scream. Connor bowed his head slightly, admitting that this had been more difficult than expected. mostly due to the mantis's erratic movements. Raising a finger, he calmly warned that next time it would be Mackie's right hand. The mantis roared in fury, calling Connor an arrogant bastard, and then launched into a frenzied assault. The host cried out in shock at the turn of events. The so-called weakling had severed Mackie's arm with a single strike, and now the enraged mantis was attacking blindly, having lost all control. Ben, supporting his head in thought, found it astonishing that Connor might have grasped the essence of a two-handed sword so quickly. He observed the battle and noted that while two-handed swords boast immense power, they also carry great risk. If an attack misses, the wielder is left vulnerable, especially when weakened by armor penalties. But then he imagined a mocking silhouette, realizing that Connor wasn't just swinging wildly. He was using the sword as both offense and defense, conserving energy while cleverly targeting the mantis's vulnerabilities. Watching Connor block yet another blow, Ben thought to himself that no one could have taught this. It was raw instinct, combined with an unrelenting will to win. Connor was, without a doubt, incredibly gifted. The old man smiled quietly, pondering whether a warrior even greater than himself had just been born. Connor raised his sword and shielded himself. The mantis pounded away furiously, yelling for Connor to stop hiding and face him directly. Looking back, Connor realized Ben's intention. By suppressing him, Ben had forced him to learn how to maximize his weapon's utility. But Ben had miscalculated something. Connor lifted his gaze. He recalled every opponent he'd ever fought, and remembered. For someone like him, who'd always fought from a disadvantaged position, using everything around him to survive wasn't new. It was second nature. Suddenly, Mackie lunged at him again, landing a fierce blow, and in his rage, tore open part of the cage around them. The mantis looked at his trapped limb and screamed that his arm was stuck. Then he froze, hearing Connor coldly remind him his right arm would be next. Connor swung his blade, severing the mantis's remaining arm. The mech-like creature opened its mouth in agony and shrieked. Moments later, he crashed to the ground. The host shouted in disbelief. Somehow, impossibly, the weakling had won. The protagonist gave a faint, knowing smirk. The entire arena erupted into a roar of voices. A spectator shouted, asking if this was really the guy, the one who had defeated all of them. The warriors around him stared in shock, confirming it was indeed him. One of them asked how it was possible they had all lost to that guy. Another warrior, clutching his stomach, explained that the guy had ambushed him without warning. But the first man lashed out at him, shouting that excuses weren't enough. Because of that defeat, his reputation had been shattered. He paused mid-swing, suddenly struck by a realization. Turning toward the crowd, he asked, "Didn't that guy seem familiar to them?" One of the spectators stared at the screen, asking someone to remind him of the fighter's name. There's no way someone like that could truly be a weakling. Another man noted that the fighter looked eerily familiar, and a nearby warrior mentioned rumors. This guy was supposedly connected to that mysterious old man associated with the ruin of Insight. What should they do now? The man turned, his voice cold and decisive. They needed to eliminate both of them. A figure in a cloak raised his glass, cautioning that it might not be so simple. That old man, Ben, was one of the 5 heavenly stars. The man gestured, repeating the name in disbelief. He'd seen Ben watching the match earlier. He had even removed his hat in the stands, briefly revealing his identity. The man introduced Ben to the others, recalling how he'd heard of Ben traveling the continent in search of rare treasures. Legend has it, wherever Ben lingers, treasure is sure to be found. Another man, catching on, asked if Ben's presence in the non-degree arena could mean something valuable was hidden there. Then he chuckled, recalling the warning about Ben's strength. Yes, it wouldn't be easy to deal with him, but that didn't mean it was impossible. Placing his glass down, the man added that under ordinary conditions, Ben was practically unbeatable. He looked down thinking, but his companion smiled, observing that right now the situation was far from normal. Things could go very differently. Elsewhere, in the arena, a new fight was underway. Tom, with a crazed smile, sneered that the challenger was lucky to face him just a week after entering the arena. Connor, composed and calm, replied that this would be their final battle. Tom lunged, hurling Connor around the ring with aggressive speed. Unshaken, Connor remarked that he had trained in boxing during his youth. Then, with precise timing, Connor kicked Tom hard in the leg. Tom stumbled, stunned by the unexpected counter. Moments later, he was still curled up in pain, unable to rise. The referee shouted triumphantly, The undefeated champion had fallen. A new legend had been born in their city. That legend was none other than Connor, the very man they once mocked as a weakling. Smiling spectators commented on how thrilling it was to watch him fight. His unpredictability made every match exciting. Even the referee laughed, struggling to believe that Connor had become champion in just a single week. One of the onlookers asked Connor how it felt to become a champion. Connor looked away, silent. Then, with a faint smile, he replied, "It might be time for him to retire." Back at the hotel, Connor stood with a golden championship belt wrapped around him. Both the buckle and the belt glowed with radiant light. System windows appeared, indicating that Connor now possessed powers tailored specifically to his nature and desires. He smiled, realizing that wearing such a mythical artifact made him feel stronger, and a bit prouder too. A man standing beside him commented that, judging by the look on Connor's face, he was clearly enjoying this moment. Ben then spoke, apologizing for missing the final match. The hero laughed, replying that no one becomes a champion overnight, not even him. He explained that it had been over a century since he first picked up a sword. Ben reflected that back then, things were completely different. In those days, the sword was simply a means to survive, not a pursuit of glory. The hero added that compared to those times, everything now felt almost fun. Nearby, a small animal dozed peacefully. Smiling, the hero turned to the young man and asked if he'd be willing to spare a bit of time. They moved toward a quiet, secluded place. The hero announced that they had arrived. It was a city once known for its pleasures, now forgotten. Home to an abandoned mine. Connor, puzzled, asked why they had come to such a place. As they strolled slowly along the deck of a yacht, both men lost themselves in thought. Eventually, Connor brought up the topic of the House of Death. He explained it was a special organization known for producing weapons of extraordinary quality. There were even theories claiming the most powerful weapons on the continent originated from there. At the heart of it all was the greatest blacksmith of all time, who had lived and worked within the House of Death. This man was renowned for his unparalleled understanding of weapons, more than any smith in recorded history. Strangely, he also took up drawing, seeking to depict in art the death his weapons could bring. Over his lifetime, he created more than 100 deadly weapons. Near the end, he focused all his effort on crafting a final ultimate weapon of destruction. Ben turned his gaze away, pondering a rumor that a fragment of a treasure map might lead to this very weapon. The hero recalled that the fragment he found was only half of the whole. Calmly, he explained that he was gathering energy for what came next. The other man responded just as calmly, saying that meeting the hero had changed his course. Connor admitted feeling ashamed of displaying his full strength in front of Ben. Someone mentioned they had learned how many pieces the map had in total. Then one of them stepped on something. They looked down and noticed a strange hole. Connor sensed that the light from within was growing stronger. Suddenly, a hand burst from the ground. A system notification appeared, warning that they had entered a dungeon. The monster inside was identified as Level. One of them cried out, saying this wasn't what he had signed up for. With a grin, Ben asked if this chaos wasn't exactly how the past week had gone. As he spoke, spectral hands drew their swords. The hero darted side to side, trying to stay out of the spotlight and out of danger. Connor checked the system again, surprised to see their level had increased. Ben was already making a swift exit. The hero shouted to Connor, urging him to stay alive and follow quickly. Behind them, the monster let out a terrifying roar. Something struck the ground hard. The group scattered, running toward the noise and chaos. Connor laughed, thrilled that he'd managed to level up all at once. Connor chuckled to himself, realizing that in certain situations, once you're in, there's no way out. And that's how it had to be. His attention shifted as he noticed strange, pet-like creatures among the monsters. A look of surprise crossed his face at the sight. Connor began examining various magical abilities and powers, considering which ones he could use. Still, part of him hesitated. He felt an urge to wait. Eventually, he made his decision and targeted a massive worm-like monster. Just then, a bird soared high above and Connor looked up, confused by its presence. A new monster suddenly appeared near him, and he threw himself into battle with all his strength. As the fight escalated, the rest of the heroes began retreating into the sky. One of them warned Connor to stay alert. Underestimating the threat could get him seriously injured. The hero, now walking away from the scene, remarked that he had grown significantly in just a week, and along the way, acquired many new skills. Later, the group visited the embassy for further investigation. The protagonist questioned Ben about a supposed 18th type, of something he had never heard of. Connor asked why Ben hadn't used an alternative option. Oddly, the man simply smiled in response. Ben explained that as he grew older and changed his life, making genuine friendships became more difficult. So instead, he got better at letting go. Connor quietly turned his gaze away. The hero commented that, in the end, perhaps none of it mattered anyway. Tolga asked Ben if he was truly giving all this away for free. Ben chuckled and replied that this was all part of his pursuit of the immortals. It was nothing more than a hobby. Still, Ben realized the hero was keeping his own fate well hidden. The group looked up at something in the distance. Everyone walked with a calm, steady pace. Someone stood quietly, observing. A nearby door remained shut. An officer approached and asked the hero why he was selling everything. The officer found it strange that the hero seemed to prioritize everything else first, and the hero himself was unsure where that mindset even came from. Suddenly, blood trickled from the man's nose. Connor rushed over, concerned, and asked if he was okay. The man laughed it off, saying it was just an old illness. It flared up now and then, but nothing serious. Then someone called out to the man. Another figure looked away with visible irritation. Chase, with a satisfied grin, asked if the path had been cleared. The hero acknowledged him and thanked everyone. The guy stared at Chase, analyzing him carefully. He remarked that Chase must be insane, causing chaos in the arena and derailing careers. As soon as he got some power, he became reckless cannon fodder. Despite it all, the heroes around them continued chatting calmly. Chase teased Connor, surprised he wasn't drinking. The hero calmly replied that Chase could now see him in his full stature. He didn't understand how anyone could fail to recognize him by now. He remembered that when conflict broke out between his guild and Genesis, someone had stolen the guild's funds. He had been a traitor back then. Chase smirked and said he'd go check out the store. Connor tried to relax. These weren't exactly peaceful days. The young man was filled with curiosity, exploring all kinds of topics, some academic, others purely personal. All he really wanted, though, was to lie down and rest. At that moment, the hero realized a harsh truth. He stood no chance against his opponent. His lips parted slightly, stunned by the weight of that realization. Without a word, Chase exited the room, closing the door behind him. Meanwhile, the man came to understand that the Genesis Guild was struggling to maintain influence in this city. The hero couldn't understand why anyone would be so concerned about him. Chase seemed just as confused, unable to grasp what the hero was trying to say. He stayed close by, perhaps for comfort or out of obligation. Suddenly, the group noticed something unusual nearby. A distraction pulled the hero's attention away. Tension built as fists were drawn back. Someone was clearly ready to strike. Then shouting erupted. Someone was yelling angrily at one of the guys. Connor tried to intervene, urging the mercenary to stay calm. He believed victory was just a matter of patience. But the hero, overcome with rage, screamed that he would kill his opponent. Chase clenched his teeth with intense determination and growled that he would do it too.